welcome everybody to MogTalk, episode 309. Today we are discussing lore and story for Dawntrail, which will include also the recent edition of Arcadion. I wanted to call this the Waiting on Moose show. I've decided against it, though, because I wanted to hold off even thinking about doing this show. And there's the chat escaping from the box that I put you guys in. I'll fix it, though. Because, you know, the idea was that we were going to come back as a group, and we just wanted to make sure everybody had a proper chance to absorb the story at the pace that was comfortable for them. And Moose decided to go at an eternal pace.
My time, didn't I? I did take my time. Though I hear like that may have benefited me, so I'm good with that.
Yeah. We'll find out. We expect you to know literally everything about the story within this conversation. So, yeah. All right.
That usually comes about a year afterwards.
Yeah. Well, guys, if you guys are unfamiliar with MogTalks, show based around Final Fantasy XIV community discussing everything from Savage Raiding to Chocobo Racing. And again, today is our lore episode. We have 3 amazing guests, which we've had on a couple of other times so far. And so we decided to continue that. And I'd like you all to introduce yourself so people have an idea who you are if for some reason they are unfamiliar. Moose, could you go first?
Sure, I could try. The way I usually describe myself is like I've just been here forever. I started doing like archiving and summaries, and then as more people showed up, it was just like, oh yeah, it's Moose. He does lore stuff. So that is manifested a little differently every year. I had like writing a lot of summaries, doing a lot of transcripts, did some lore interviews when that was available. Did a lot of hanging out on the lore forums, kind of depending on the current pH balance of that atmosphere. Had the privilege of editing lore books 2 and 3, and I don't know, at this point I'm still just kind of doing a little bit of everything I've ever done. I think probably the biggest engagement I get at this point is just answering questions in DMs.
The personal lore by Moose. We should make it chat Moose or whatever you call it. Moose J was it GPT or whatever?
Moose GPT.
Oh no. God.
Just a single outrider that's just like recycling Moose's statements, but like in a really bad way. It's like disjointed, so everyone's like, "That's not lore. That was never in the game." And then then just messes up.
I think we figured out what his soul would be doing in Solution 9. Is
oh, that would be great. We should do that. All right. M, could you tell everybody who you are?
Yes, I am M, resident MogTalk raider, cosplayer, person who bothers Frosty about lore more than he would probably like. I do a little bit of everything. Lorance on Twitter, cosplay stuff. Finally, again, with Dawntrail, I'm picking that up again. So I'm just passionate about Final Fantasy, and I'm excited that I keep getting invited back to talk about it with you guys. So
Yeah. Well, I keep saying good things about me. You'll be back here.
Okay, all right, boss.
Yeah. All right, Crow, can you tell everybody who you are?
I am a big lore nerd.
Okay, fair.
Yeah, just have been part of the experience of Final Fantasy XIV since 2015. It's hard. It's getting harder to remember. I hate it. But yes, it was right after Heavensward had just came out. I started playing on the PS3 of all places. Weird, right? And then through the process of just engaging with the media on social media and just getting really invested with the storytelling, because Mayhero did a great job with Heavensward. I still love that story in its own bubble. It has its own space, right? I enjoy it there. That, and then moving into Stormblood, being able to experience that, and then just all of a sudden I started working with Etherflow Media, wrote articles for them. I got to interview Natsuko Ishikawa once, which was insane. Just the random stuff that happens when you get to play your favorite game and engage with your favorite people who play also the favorite game. So here we are today, just being able to talk about Dawntrail on on Frosty Mog. It's super awesome. Yeah, just
Frosty
been able
Mog.
to.
You on
Frosty Mog. I got you. I got you. I remembered.
Yeah. For those that are curious, this channel has been renamed to Frosty Mog due to it being a personal channel of mine as well. Instead of just calling it straight up MogTalk, since we do a lot of streams that are not MogTalk now. For anyone who is curious about the name change. But yeah, no, I'm glad to have all three of you guys here. You know, I've been looking forward to this show and having, you know, discussions about the story has been a huge topic, guys. It's been a pretty big topic over the last month and a half. And I want to go ahead and put a disclaimer out there for anyone watching this. We will have spoilers. We're talking about everything without any kind of holding back in any regard. So if you're worried about any spoiler, don't be here and watch it as a VOD later on. But yeah, I'm excited for this. Again, you know, Moose has been a part of the MogTalk lore story shows for so long, so freaking long, and so I feel, yeah, he just, you know, you're like a representative of MogTalk on the lore side at the moment, Moose. Just to let you know.
Yeah, it's an honor.
The Mog Moose. Anyways, we decided that we would wait on Moose to finish the story, and he wanted to absorb it like a fine wine. Just sip it a little bit at a time and get it all into his body, and then now we can fully talk about it. So I want to start today's show with Moose's general impressions, things that just stand out, things that you want to talk about after finishing the story. What are the big things that stood out for you, Moose?
I'm just gonna go in like order of what comes to mind.
Yes.
I think like just general overall impression finishing the story is the first thing that comes to mind, because like I believe I said that I didn't really have any huge expectations going into Dawntrail. I think all I really expected from it was that it was going to kind of introduce me to a new beginning, and that I would hope to be hooked by that new beginning and see if we could start building towards something from there. So in that sense, I think it was a really good jumping off point. I wasn't expecting to become like terribly cognitively or emotionally invested in the story just yet. We don't have any like long run waits between patches, anything to latch onto and build up and theorize about. I wasn't expecting to be like, you know, Shadowbringers invested just yet. I just wanted the world to feel kind of big and grounded and unfamiliar, and I got that. So what I keep coming back to as my general opinion, I think, is that every individual part of Dawntrail along the way, I really enjoyed playing that individual part along the way. Like if I think of any individual zone, I had a lot of fun in that zone. And I don't know how everyone else played, but the way I played was I did 4 to 6 hours a day. And I would come into the zone, I would do the MSQ, I would do the side quests immediately when they popped. And so what would end up happening is I had this recurring pattern of I would come in, we would be, you know, introduce Wooklamat to everybody. We would figure out a local issue that's going on. We'd get involved with it. There'd be some side quests. We'd wrap it up. Wooklamat would take off, and then I would get to know everybody else in town and go through a couple other stories. And then she'd go off and do politics stuff, and then I'd hook up with her later, and we'd go on to the next zone. And so every time we did that, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed, the zones were beautiful. The cultures in the zones were cool. I really liked all the like ways we integrated with them. I don't think there were really any weak side quest chains. I enjoyed all of those. So what ended up happening was all of that was great. Each individual part. The problem was when I got to the end, I felt like the whole was less than the sum of its parts. Like I couldn't build all of the parts into a cohesive anything, really. Like it felt like if I tried to build one cohesive narrative, it felt like there were two chunks of narrative. If I tried to, you know, build one cohesive tone, it was a couple different tones along the way. And so I felt like it was just, when you assembled all the parts, it was hard to build a big picture that was just like you could step back and go, great, perfect. But I really loved every individual part. I just need to get to a point where I'm like, I'm going to give it to 0.3 before I say it's not that way. But I think every time I was playing it, what I kept coming back to is it feels very compartmentalized. Like we each zone, you're kind of slit a box, and you open the box and you unpack the box and you play with everything that's in the box, and then you put everything back into the box and you slide the box away and you get your next box. And especially like the first 3 zones, it felt kind of like the same box with different stuff in it, kind of.
Right.
So yeah, like that was the only thing I had to criticize, really, was that I couldn't quite understand what it wanted to be. Like, did it want, like, I'll give you one random example. Did it want to be a game that went all the way, like, coming off of the cosmic craziness of Endwalker? Are we going to come all the way back to the ground and start in a grounded place and rebuild our way back up? Or are we just kind of cresting and coming down one step of crazy? Like, the first half of the story was one and the second half of the story was another. And I don't know if it like transitioned between those two as smoothly as it could have. So that was the only criticism I really had, was that I couldn't build a real cohesive big picture where the whole was more than the sum of its parts. But I really enjoyed every individual part as I played, and I think the big picture was like perfectly whelming, not overwhelming, not underwhelming. I'm whelmed.
It was whelming.
Perfectly whelmed. It was perfectly cromulent. I found it to be perfectly cromulent.
So, you know, it's funny when you talk about how you approach the story. I personally, and I know M as well, powered through it. Just went through. I think I powered through it a different way. Like, I didn't hit any side quests. I didn't hit like anything. But I watched all of the main story cutscenes. I went through all of that. And I told myself I was going to do it because I wanted to be able to talk about, you know, my thoughts and feelings on the story immediately after. So it was done in the span of a weekend for me. M did it a little bit faster than I did too, I think. But it was completely opposite in terms of how I approached it than you. Crow, how did you approach the story?
I documented the whole thing on Twitch. I just, you know, played it as I could. Since I have I work weekends usually. It was just like Monday to Wednesday. I just played the entire day, or as much as I could during that day, and then the weekend I would work and then come back the next week, and then I managed to get it done right as the Arcadion dropped. So it was like within the month. But
so it was pretty slow as well in general.
Yeah, I was able to kind of like crawl through it, but like
2 weeks.
It was still like,
was it 2 weeks?
It was faster than my usual. Yeah, it was faster than my usual runs.
Yeah.
It was like, I know Endwalker took me a little bit before I started making videos and stuff. Of course, it was like, you know, I would take months to do stuff, but now it's like, okay, wait, I kind of got to get through this before I get spoiled and stuff like that.
It was
the spoil
rough.
Fear. Right?
It was rough. Moose, I don't know how you did it, but like the spoilers were everywhere. Like
I got lucky.
Day one.
I think people were
I totally disengaged. What I did in my server is I made a forum, and so in the forum was a thread for each level. So when you were done with 90, you could pop into the 90 room and talk about everything you'd seen so far. When you were done with 91, you could pop into the 91 room and talk about everything you'd seen so far. So everybody kind of like got to pop in at whatever level they were. And they just hung out in there and did their thing. Like, my server was dead quiet because everyone who had finished everything was in the level rooms chatting. So I had to go back and do that later. But I cut myself off from everything.
That's crazy, dude. Like, I wanted to be done with it, so I didn't have to think about it. I didn't have to think about ways to stay unspoiled with it. I mean, I didn't mind if I did or not. You know, worst case scenario, I get a little bit spoiled because I'm not that horribly upset if it comes across and I figure out something that was super obvious to me anyways. But for example, finding out who the Crystal Exarch was, right? That was pretty who could that be? But no, like with this story in particular, it did get a lot of I guess negative feedback in the way of pacing and, you know, and how it was going. But it was also, there's people who would say, well, it's because you're expecting some grand adventure when it's not your adventure, someone else's adventure, and it's not as extreme or as intense as what you've had in the past, and you should have been expecting that, so that's why it seems boring. But there's been, like, as soon as everybody was done. The first week or two were people arguing about if the story was good or not. And Moose, it sounds like you believe the story was good, but in its packaged zones as a whole, it seems like there's something maybe a little bit off.
Yeah, it felt, I mean, I struggle to find a way to describe it, because it's like I didn't think anything about it was particularly bad. Like, I thought it was packaged, like, I'm going to use a metaphor I haven't used since 1.0, because I think something similar happened here, but not on the same scale. The way I used to describe this was, imagine you wanted to build a statue, like, just make it of whatever you want, a person, a ship, whatever. You wanted to build a statue, and you got together like 5 or 6 different teams, and you said, okay, you're going to build this part of the statue, you're going to build this part of the statue, and then everybody goes home and builds their part, and then you come back and you put them all together. But it turns out that no one really communicated well about like the pose or the scale or the size. So when you put all the pieces together, it's kind of obvious that it wasn't fine-tuned to be put together into one engineered piece that all fits together and looks like one statue. Like, you know, maybe one arm's a little bigger, maybe like one foot's a little bigger.
Okay.
It felt like maybe it didn't quite know what it wanted to be, and there wasn't quite as much communication along the way that would help them kind of adjust each part to fit together perfectly. I don't know. I have no insight into this whatsoever. It just felt to me like maybe that's why the pacing was so weird.
I mean, and yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I think there's also something to be said for the fact that the core gameplay loop hasn't fundamentally changed much in the 10 plus years that this game has existed, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because it's well functioning as an MMO. But when you're kind of starting a new story arc, a game is more than just its story. An MMO is more than just its rating, right? Which all of that has been on par. But when the core gameplay loop has remained the same for so long, some more interactivity with some of these things would probably have engaged people more. And if we hit the same story beats with a little bit more engagement, a more of the why instead of the here's the thing, because we love here's the thing as a lore people, right? But it's still a video game. If it's like, hey, we're doing this thing, you are physically doing this thing instead of being shown it, I think that would go a long way into, oh, this was like such a bad story. I'm like, I don't feel that way, but I do feel like there was some sort of engagement lacking, a little bit more deviation from, again, that core gameplay loop, kind of expanding on it, adding more interactivity, more solo instances instead of cutscenes, that sort of thing, would probably have gone a long way as to changing people's perception of what is really a strong narrative.
Yeah. I think the biggest issue they had was the presentation of it. And like how we experienced it as a video game player, right? And
exactly. That's
it. It's literally,
and it's the little things too, because players are trained to like, oh, this is a voiced cutscene, therefore it's more important. Not that people are like always skipping the ones without dialogue, but you do tend to put more weight on them. So it's those little things that change the player perception going through it, interacting with it as a video game instead of just a story.
Yeah. I haven't heard any kind of response from Square Enix about their thoughts on it. I don't know if we will for a little bit, right?
Probably not.
Yeah. It's a little sad because I think a lot of people were expecting like just another knockout of the park, because Square Enix has just been fucking killing it every single one, right? And like their Metacritic score or whatever goes up every single time, but now it's dipped back down.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit weird. I mean, the game itself, you know, outside of the story, is probably in one of the best states it's been in a long time. Just like that experience of the expansion story felt a little bit odd. But that being said, you know, we're here to talk about mostly the story, and so we'll dive into mainly that. And so, anything else, Moose, standing out to you throughout your gameplay that you would want to talk about?
I'm trying to think. Like, I know there's things that we're probably going to hit on, because there's like a few kind of gravity wells of discourse, and I don't want to just like jump into one of those out of nowhere. But no, I think I've got most of what I was thinking out of the way, but like I do agree that like a couple more voice cutscenes, a couple more solo instances, maybe checking in the background with what the Warrior Light is doing when Wuklamad is doing like her stuff. I think like a few of those adjustments could have smoothed over a lot.
Yeah. I mean,
not all of it, but
I mean,
a good chunk.
I think there could have been a lot more story being told within interaction, and it was. I think, what was it, 21, 23 hours of cutscenes and maybe 3 to 4 hours of actually playing the game.
The whole expansion was only
or something.
The whole expansion was only 25 hours, so it's definitely not that much.
It's a lot, though. I have to go back and look at it, but it's a lot. And just reading dialogue and stuff like that, and that's what you're doing when you're absorbing the story. Right. But I feel like there could have been other mediums for it too.
It's the principle of writing where you want to show, don't tell, and there was a lot of telling this time around, and that just doesn't work so much for a video game versus if we're reading this in like a book, or hell, even watching this as like a movie, probably would have been like, oh yeah, this is what we're getting out of it. But as far as like player engagement and enjoying it as like an MMO expansion, having that like you participation factor, even if you're not the main character, like the you participation factor is important when it's a video game that you are playing.
Yeah, I will ask this, because this is something that is one of my biggest gripes. Just a point every time I like to bring up is the fact that you go into this whole crazy situation where this guy releases this horrible like monster to go and destroy the fucking world, right? Claws in the mountain, everything, and it was really, you're like, okay, this is like genocidal, like horrible stuff, right? That we need to like handle this, and then you go into a cooking competition immediately after with him. That's the kind of stuff that felt weird to me within the story pacing, right? Moose, what were your thoughts on that? Did you have like any kind of like?
Oh, I totally do. Okay. I'm gonna connect it to what I was saying before, because this is just one of the places that gave me that impression, and I'll even throw another one in the box with us. So remember what I was talking about, like the boxes and the compartmentalization of stuff. This is one of the things that really highlighted that for me, is there doesn't seem to be a lot of running consequences. There doesn't seem to be like, if you make a choice, the consequences of that choice should kind of have a rolling effect. And it seems like a lot of the things we did really only affected the one scene in which it was highlighted, unless it was a big plot point for later. It didn't seem like all the pieces were integrated. So we didn't really revisit the consequences of Valagarmanda and its release and Vakul Jaja's role in that release all that much. And even part of it's Wuklamat's personality, I think. I think even in the final battle, if Zoralja was just like, you know what? No, you're right. My bad. Never mind. I'm going to step down. She would have been like, okay, we'll figure out how to resolve this together.
So good. Yeah. No, don't worry about the souls you just absorbed or anything.
To me that's kind of the point, because I approached a lot of the story from the bigger picture, just because that's kind of who I am as a person when I'm consuming this kind of story. And obviously I'm going to put the disclaimer here that this doesn't work in the real world. We're fully just talking about a fictional universe here, right? A lot of it is like, you are naive. I'm talking about Wuklamad. For Kona, his whole thing was like, I am going to advance science of this like corner of the world to a startling degree. And Bakul Jaja and Zoralja were very much in the boat of like the military conquest side of things, right? And none of those things work. And a fundamental part of the overarching theme of the whole expansion is that you have to change as a person as you grow up, and you are not right, and you have to figure that out at some point. So again, there is a disconnect between Bakul Jaja releasing Valagarmanda and then him having to deal with this, but there is a lot of that we're also not seeing on his end, because that is something I'd like a trial or something in patch content, A, because I think it would be funny, and B, because it does need to be addressed. But that brings us to that trial with Zeralja, because he was a character who refused to have that kind of inner dialogue with himself and the people around him. And he probably wouldn't have been like a free man at the end of the day, but if he had decided to change his mind and own up to the things that he's done wrong, he probably could have just served prison time or something instead, because his family did still care about him at the end of the day.
End too,
and you're right, exactly. So it's one of those things where, like, if you screw up, own up to it. And the consequences like need to be dealt with, but I think that they kind of address that on the other end, that if you don't fix these things, if you don't fix these ideas that you have that are fundamentally bad for yourself and for other people, you would have to face an end like that, because that must have been internal torture for his soul to take on as many as he did. But like in the end of the day, his family had to be the people who made the decision of, we have to kill him, because that's the only thing that we can resolve this with, right? He refused to make that step to change versus, and again, happens later on, Kona, we see his decisions beforehand, but Bakul Jaja, he starts being like, oh, maybe I should protect people instead of killing them. Is this correct? Like, he should still see a therapist and maybe go on trial. But yeah, that's more my point is more that, like, thematically on the overarching part of the story, it's a character narrative about doing better, and I think it does a very good job of that.
Okay.
I do want to add this tiny little bit. I know everyone goes after Bakul Jaja because he was the one that cast.
Oh, should have talked crap, dude. I don't know what to tell you. You should have talked crap.
Got him.
Yeah, he should have talked crap to him.
No one suspects Bakul Jaja.
All right, you guys.
He must have got really mad at me. I'm not allowed to say his name.
I guess not. Turn on your camera when you get a chance, and then it'll fix everything. Okay, perfect.
Sorry about that.
Right.
Yeah, no, I the moment I said his name, no, it was the fans. It was the Bakul Jaja fans. They heard the name and they were like, what? And they assumed I was saying something negative. No, I'm not saying anything negative yet. No, the idea is just to put it out there that, okay, Bakul Jaja is just, he's a bully, right? And the concept of bullies is that they were bullied or are bullied, right? The chain of bullying, right? You get into the psychology of bullying, it's insane, right? But the most important thing is a bully is bullied, right? And we learned that, right? We learned about his relationship with his dad. His dad's a jerk, right? So he's a jerk. It's like, I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like when I saw that, I was like, oh, been there, done that, right? Oh gosh, right? It's like you understand that reason. It just makes you make dumb decisions. And freeing Valley Garmondo was an insanely dumb decision. But let's not forget, he was spurred on by the Sage, right? Zoraja's little friend that got murked halfway into the story. He was messing around with a lot of stuff in the background that I noticed. Like if there's like maybe like one line of text, right, where Bakul Jaja's like that Buniwa, right? He says that like because he's getting led on to do what he's doing, right? So he's just following through. He's like, "Oh, you want me to break the ice? Sure." He's not thinking about it, right? And then later on, he's like, "Oh, you just released the strongest Thuravadral in existence, bro. Like because the Sage told you to do it, and you didn't question him." It's that kind of thing, right? It's like I think the really important tiny details that kind of give them a little bit more understanding in the sense, like I don't think he was trying to kill people. He was just like, oh, they can handle it, right? Like, or, I don't know. He's just being. It's just a dumb choice. It was just a huge dumb choice. He followed through with what the Sage told him, and he was like, "Oh wait, this probably wasn't the great decision." And instead of actually try to fix it, he runs, right? Because he's a bully, right? He's not thinking straight. He's upset because his dad put him to this insane reality of having to save the entire population of Mamuk, and that is not an easy thing to hold, especially, and then be treated as poor as he was. It's like. There's a lot to this. I think there's like those layers you got to kind of like really consider, especially in the sense of like when someone gets bullied. No, they make dumb decisions when they get bullied.
It's strong as a character narrative, and I think that speaks to Moose's point that like individual stories work so well together because they are character driven, and that's where some of the strongest writing comes from.
Okay.
I actually remember making a similar point along the way, which is where like I had almost no questions about Bakul Jaja being someone who would let their like ambition and anxiety and all the pressure that's on them make ill-considered decisions. We see that in the real world every day. People do that every day. And what I think when it comes to Bakul Jaja, what I could have done with was just like a couple more steps on that staircase. Like when I was paying attention to him, he went from like custom spitting while talking animation brutishness to suddenly had like a much bigger vocabulary and capacity for self-reflection. And I could have just done like with a couple more steps, like a couple more hints it was coming, like a little more build up to that. Like it was kind of like a light switch moment for me. But I had no questions about like why he might have done what he done. I think there could have been a little more of a snowballing consequence to it throughout the story. It was kind of wrapped up really, like it was wrapped up in that compartment, and then we moved on to the next compartment.
True.
I think there's also something to be said for him and the rest of the claimants to the throne. Like, they weren't that old either. Like, who makes good decisions in their early 20s? I'm just saying.
And it's like we have to like the blessed sibling concept is so wild to me. Like I know we're kind of like diving. I don't want to like jump so far ahead,
dude. Just fine.
Just for the Bakul Jaja discussion, right? Not only is he a youth, he's also insanely strong. I mean, he's got the combined might and magic of his peoples in his hand. Like he can do so many things above anyone else, and they rely on him because of that, right? So it's like, it's just when you're a kid and you're able to lift a car, what are you gonna? You're an idiot, right? You're gonna throw that car. Oh look, I'm so cool. Like he wasn't given. Like, I don't know, maybe if Bakul Jaja had a guide or a mentor when he was a kid on how to not throw cars, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like something like that, some sort of guiding influence during the younger years, but I don't think that was the case. I'm pretty sure as soon as he was born, everyone was super excited because they haven't had a blessed sibling in several generations. This was, like, I mean, exhaustion, right? Depression at a, like, civilizational scale, right? I mean, this is messing with hundreds of individuals. They are not able to do what they think they're supposed to do because it's not happening. And then boom, he's born. I mean, that's yeah. Good luck, guy. I'm so sorry for you, bro. You just got you got thrown thousands of generations of hope onto your hands, and you're also a brat. So, I
think it's also interesting to bring that up too, because I'm trying to imagine Galul Jaja being under some sort of similar pressure, because there is a lot of just culturally being a blessed sibling. Because that was discussion that I saw early on, where people were like, why is Galul Jaja allowing Bakul Jaja to even be a part of this? This feels stupid. Why isn't it only his kids? Like, even Zoralja didn't seem like the bad guy at the start, because remember, they talk about, there's someone who absolutely cannot be allowed to take the throne. And we all assumed it was Bakul Jaja, but it ended up being Zoralja, right? But part of me wonders if Galul Jaja, this is a lot of Jaja.
All right. We love her Mamulja.
I mean, I do. I'm trying not to talk about Final Fantasy XI so hard right now. But he probably knows exactly what has been going on inside of Bakul Jaja's head, the pressure that he's under, the societal pressure, the cultural pressure, a lot of the things that made him who he is, and like, nobody's perfect. I wonder how much of Galul Jaja had similar experiences as a kid, where he probably also had to figure stuff out 100 years ago now, right? But I feel like that's probably the reason that he allowed Bakul Jaja to set himself up as another promise to the throne, specifically because, like, this is about the journey. That was the whole point of the Rite of Succession, was this is about the journey, because he needed his kids to stop being naive kids, but he needed the same thing from Bakul Jaja. I think it's neat that it very much comes across as giving him a chance that he may not have had,
And it is important to note, he also told Kittenram to watch Mamuk. He's like, hey, buddy, I just need you to keep an eye on them because I'm pretty sure they're
Right.
going to cause some problems. I'm from here. I get it. So, he's like, just keep an eye on them, and then did his thing because he's like, he knew at the end of it, right? Especially the last challenge as well, right? There was almost a moment where he's like, I'm not acknowledging this. This isn't going to happen. It's like, nope, you kind of have to because he did what the test was won. So,
Right.
like
It
he
was
had to
so
come
nice
in
too because it came as a form of breaking the cycle of abuse too. I think that was just such a neat trope because they did something similar with Zeralja and his son at the end of
Oh,
it,
yeah.
where he's like, "I'm leaving you a legacy, but only take the parts that you want because I don't want to give you the bad parts." I
That
just
was
think it's
crazy.
neat,
I cried so hard.
right?
I'm not even gonna lie. I'm like,
Yeah,
oh man,
sobbing.
dude.
Right. So it's
Uh,
those neat like thematic character elements that really made Dawntrail special to me.
mm-hmm.
Okay. I am gaining some sympathy for the story a little bit more after hearing you guys talk. I will say that's true. I mean, like, just to let you guys know, like, my perspective of this is that the story, you guys give it at least some credit. I was giving it little to no credit. Cause there's parts of it, right? And so, like, that first part, I was painful to experience to me because I wanted to go through a video game story and not just the starting dialogue that just kind of goes through all this stuff, learning about stuff that we don't care about anymore. Like, none of that, to my knowledge, most of that stuff in each of those zones doesn't really matter at all going forward. It matters in learning it for the throne and everything, but I don't think it matters in the grand scale of the story. Right? I don't know. It's just the experience of it, right?
Right. It's hard. So Dawntrail is absolutely, hey, check out Thrall. Right. I mean, you have to think about the PR behind it too, right? They had a big old website, Thrall, right? Here's all these recipes from this place. Like, here's all these stuff from this place, right? I think in part, right, it is important to know we were essentially tourists in a way, right? And each zone was, in fact, a new portion of the planet of Atheris to discover. It's hard to tell because it's like if you don't, and this isn't everybody's thing, right? I love to travel, right? I'm always out and about, especially when conventions and stuff happen. Like, I love to go out and try the different restaurants down the street from the convention. I'm always trying new things. That's just how I do, and it always opens. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that's where that comes from, or I didn't know where that, and finding out those cool little things. I think that's what the intention was, right? Dawntrail is our tourist expansion, right? We're getting introduced to this massive new continent that has, here's the thing, and Moose can credit this because I actually went to him back when I was presenting for LunarCon. I was talking about Thural, and I asked him, I was like, was there any mention of Thural in 1.0? And he was like, he did his thing, the Moose magic, right? And we literally found one reference, and it wasn't even named. All it said was Western Continent, and it was about the Popodo. And I was like, that's all that was in 1.0 about the West? Literally, like nothing. There was nothing, right? Thural was very new. Everything that we got was a combination of several 2.0 references, and then, what they added recently, like a lot of new stuff they added recently. We're still trying to comb through all of that. But again, it's like they wanted you to learn about this new continent. They're like, hey, you are, Seed of Azem, right? Traveler role. Let's go ahead and travel. Here's some new stuff, new food, tacos, right? It was just a big, tourist expansion. And I think moving into the patches, we're going to start seeing more definitive reasons why certain things were like told, especially the Yakui, right? Oh gosh, we got so much to know. There's so much to talk about the giant culture. Guarantee you they're going to come back for many reasons. And yeah, among other things, right? I want to say this is just a door at best, right? It's just, if you want to check it out, it's cool. It's cool. Look, jungle. What I mean? It's just like there's just all these like nice, colorful explanations of why the people do what they do here. The similar but different stuff that we got to experience, which I like. I like that kind of stuff because when we got to go to the first, they did that there. It's like, okay, you remember this? Well, it's like this now, and you're like, oh gosh, that's cool. They did that again. They actually compared. There was like scenes where they're like, hey, you remember this guy from Shadowbringers? And you're like, yes. Yes, I didn't need you to tell me. I got it. That was cool. But now I'm like, oh, that was you ruined it for me now because you told me. It's like, but it was those moments they wanted you to kind of do that, like similar but different effect again. And yeah, I wouldn't say, like you were saying, I wouldn't say it's like this is the main story. We're starting our new chapter as a Seed of Azem member, or the future Seed of Azem member thing. You know, this isn't like anything definitive of what we have to do. The only thing I would say that will start moving forward is whatever the heck the key is. That's our next mission, right? It's like, we got to figure out what this thing is and why the heck it has our symbol in it. So yeah, that's our story beat. Everything else was just tourist. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
Moose.
But yeah.
Yeah, I think there's like the key and a little more about the nature and history of the shard we were dealing with. I think that's like the only two things it didn't explain. And I'm not sure where to go with this, because like as I was listening to you guys talk about it, I had like a 3-pronged fork of ways I could go with it. I had some stuff about Zoral Shah, I had some stuff about Wuklamat. I'm getting like, as you guys are talking though, I'm getting the sense that like part of this goes back to like what Em was saying, this psychological experience of being the player absorbing this story, because you have to go through it yourself. You have to play it yourself, regardless of what it's about. Like, you might not be the main person, but you're still playing it, right? I think it goes back to that, like, doesn't totally know what it wants to be vibe that I get from it. Like, we get there and there's like a lighthearted tone, an explorational tone, like a summer vacation tone. And some of that goes away and some of it doesn't. Like, I remember people making a lot of shonen anime jokes as we were going along. Like, we were just in an episodic shonen, one episode at a time, you know? And it would show you, and you could make some guesses as to what's coming, and then it would reward you in the tell portion, where it like kind of summed up everything you just saw, so you couldn't like misinterpret it and go tell people what was canon. And yeah.
Well, you know, it's funny
really
you say that.
Flesh out the telling. Okay, go
the tones and everything. It's like, again, crazy snake thing, cooking competition. Well, we feel kind of bad now. Hey, look, there's a lot of jars here with a very sad story in a big lake. Just here
that messed me up.
Right.
I was not ready.
So that's
like
the impact.
It starts off like I was saying, it starts off lighthearted and explorational. And again, it shows you and then tells you much more than it showed you, just so you can't misinterpret it. And it doesn't leave much room for mystery or complexity. And then suddenly intergenerational trauma, and thinking about how we relate to our parents, and thinking about like what death means, and what it's like to be left behind when others die, and what it's like to carry the memories of others who aren't here but are here. And it got like really philosophical and dark at certain points, especially in terms of like intergenerational and parental trauma, and it was all kind of mixed together, but not always well integrated.
Right, and I think that's also something, because I will compare this to Endwalker in the sense that they had 30-something% more cutscenes than any other expansion in Endwalker, and it shows in the runtime of it, because that was 36 hours to the 25 of Dawntrail, right? But the thing that Dawntrail also had to do on top of manage the gameplay versus the story element of that kind of intensive narrative is they also had to reset the scope, like the scale, the power balance, because we've just had a universe-ending threat. They had to bring it back down to a personal level, and Frosty's heard me talk about this a few times now. It's a lot to manage. It's a very fine, hard line to walk, and not everyone's going to enjoy it, and that's fine, because this is also an MMO setting, right? Like, maybe the story isn't for you, but you're really enjoying the raids. Maybe you're really having a great time fishing. Like, there's something here for everyone, and then now that you have, like, the power reset out of the way, the next expansion is maybe going to be more of what you want out of an MMO. And it's at a certain level, art is also subjective in the level that you're engaging with it. So I think that the show and don't tell portion of it being inverted alongside the power reset probably had a lot to do with the interpretation of it. Because I'm coming from the boat of, I got everything that I wanted and expected out of the expansion, so I am a very happy camper.
That's great. I mean, coming back to that, I believe the next expansion is going to be insane.
I
In
can't
comparison
wait.
to
I'm
this
already
one,
like,
I have
I can
very
get my hands
high
on it.
hopes for it because, especially because I believe at least Square Enix sees their community reaction towards a lot of their content and things, and sometimes they not I don't want to say overreact, but they tune it completely into the other direction, and they'll make sure that it's like we might have like a huge dark expansion next one. It's just like really over aggressive, no cultural learning anywhere. It's just death, and that's it. And it's just going to be really
that's morbid.
I mean, maybe it's just nothing but jars in a lake, and that's just we're going through lakes of jars, and that's the whole expansion. I don't know, but I assume that they're going to like get away from the lighthearted stuff and just go completely on the other side of it. But we'll see. I mean, I don't know for sure, but
all we know. So the hints that they've got was the cosmic exploration. They posted some pictures of that in the Chinese Fan Fest, and then there was Occult Crescent, which is supposed to be the next exploratory zone. So they're bringing back the Bosnia aesthetic. That content's coming back, but it's gonna be different. Yeah, so that's all I know.
Well, I mean, like with this
gonna...
expansion, like that's all within this expansion's like
scope.
Right,
the next one. Right, I got you.
But I think like in the next expansion we might see that, and a lot of battle changes for sure in that one too. That's a whole other thing. But yeah, I think that this story in particular, and by the way, everybody, I'm not talking about like being an expert at the story in any way, shape, or form. I am talking from the perception of someone who has to be spoon-fed good stuff. I can't find the good stuff. I like to be fed the good stuff, right? And so it's neat to find it every once in a while. You guys help me find it. But I'm just a casual story enjoyer in that sense. And, you know, I've said this a whole bunch of times. I'm not trying to be like completely negative. I made a point not to skip any of the cutscenes or anything. It was a big debate whether I level up really fast, skip everything, get to the end, just start pounding out, like leveling my character and everything else, or I absorb the story. If I had a choice now, I would have skipped all the story and just went straight to the end.
You would have gotten out of context trivia mid-raid, and it would have been very funny.
yeah. And I would have. There are parts that I really did like about the story in general. You know, I liked the second half a little bit more because it kind of goes into the story types that I like to explore. I like that kind of edgy, philosophical kind of thing, the deep 14 thoughts, right, that you could have. It's one of those things where I enjoy it, and I enjoy like the impact and how that kind of feels. But it did feel like it came out of it really felt like it came out of nowhere. The bridge was literally the Golden City, right? And the sun, all right, the big bad sun, lost the trial, and he disappears into the Golden City, and that is the link to the other part of the entire story, right? That's the only thing that connects all of this. Then we just go into a whole other story.
Go ahead, Moose, because this is where I can't put off the FF11 conversation any longer.
Okay.
Okay.
No,
it's there.
You actually reminded me of one of the things that I did want to come back to in terms of, again, the like trying to figure out what Dawntrail wants to be, and all of what you guys are saying plugs into that right now. Like, it really does feel like it has a first half of the story and a second half of the story, and it's connected by, if we never had the Rite of Succession, Zoralja never would have made that contact in a way that made the whole Alexandria thing possible in the first place. So in a way, there's like that's one of our few snowballing things. And that was what was ironic to me, was like the one running systemic influence we have didn't feel like it was integrated. It felt like it was just kind of like that one switch from part 1 to part 2. But you were talking about like the power balance and the scale of the story, and we're like coming down from a universe ending threat. And I liked having really grounded like scale. I really like trying to think of the stakes. I liked grounded stakes.
Yes.
And then suddenly Zerul Jha runs in with his Halo trip, and there's a nation-on-nation war, and I'm still on board with it. Like we're not going crazy. It's still kind of local. And then as we're exploring that, suddenly like the queen of the other nation is like slow motioned end singer, and every shard into existence is on the line at once. The whole cosmos on the line at once. And it's like, how far down did we come in stakes? Wait, hold on.
It's so. Here's my good news for you, Frosty. Before I go into this, through playing Dawntrail, you have essentially successfully played 2 entire expansions of Final Fantasy XI.
Oh, okay.
Congrats! Good job.
Thank you. I don't have to play 11 now. Thank you. Let's go.
You will be subjected to 11 trivia. I'm sorry, it's gonna happen.
That's awesome.
But I had, in the last episode we did before Dawntrail released, I had made a joke about Tulia. Just because, like, Tulia Lal has a very similar name, and Tulia was set up in a very similar premise of, oh, there's this key-looking thing in a gate, and I said, this is probably not a gate, this is something else. It ended up, living memory just ended up straight up being Tulia, to the point where when we got there, I had to, like, sit and stare at the wall for 10 minutes, because I was like, oh, this is happening. The signs were actually there, because I'm going through the first half of the story, which does feel like kind of a separate thing when you're looking at it through that lens, but a lot of the Yokhoi quests, for example, I'd already talked about. They're quoting like the visions of this place directly, like they're direct quotes. A lot of Mamuk, everything Mamul Jha is Final Fantasy XI down to the Blessed Siblings. It felt like a love letter to the fact that they took a lot of this lore that had already been established for over 2 decades at this point, and just kind of expanded on it now that they had the budget and the graphics and the capability to do it.
Yeah.
There was so much from all of these zones, all of this story that was pointing in this direction with that context, which I realize is not a thing a lot of people are going to pick up on, especially if you haven't played 11. But it was very much that which it was referencing. It was referencing the specific expansions, Rise of the Zealard and Treasures of Adargon. And I saw it, like, I was like, okay, when are we getting to the thing that changes the concept of what it means to be alive? I was waiting on that, because
Alliance
to me, yeah, right, I'm not even getting into that yet, because that's going to be a whole separate thing that's not related to the MSQ, right? But it came across to me very much in the sense of, here are some Easter eggs for you. And then you get to the end of it, and it's like, hey, this was actually building up to the same story beat. It was just a very, very neat hallmark back to the roots of 14 being built on the roots of 11, and it was nice to see that they didn't just take the Mamul Jha out of context and a whole lot of other of these things out of context. The Blue Mage stuff, for example, they actually did something with it. So it was neat to see those through lines build out, and it's still its own very, very unique thing. But the end goal being a thing that made you question what being alive was, I was here for it. But that's my 11 spiel. Very quickly. It was so good.
Yeah, I like that. I wish I played 11. I never got the chance. But it's the draw, right? It's a Final Fantasy. It has really long, the history of Final Fantasy XI's influence on 14, it has to be mentioned. You have to remind yourself, right? The first 5 character options are spiritual successors of the 5 character options that were in 11, right? I mean, 11 is baked into this game. It's been there. And so this was this time to be able to, expound on it.
It's so much more tangible than it's ever been, instead of just like, here are the roots of it.
Awesome,
it's, hey, we're taking this story that most Final Fantasy players have never touched, have never thought of.
And some might not even be able to,
Right, yeah. So it was nice to put it in a way that you could experience it, because 11 suffers from being a 20-something-year-old MMO, so a lot of it is hard to install, hard to play, mostly told by cutscene, maybe a few battle instances, mostly overworlds, like kill this thing, pick this thing up, go back to the same NPC, right? So it felt like a love letter in a way that it kind of needed to be. So That's my thing on that. I just had to mention it because it's that was the connecting thread for me. Is they're quoting this thing that's building up to this thing, and it very much felt cohesive to me because of that. But I also recognize that that's not a background that a lot of players are coming from. So here is my gift to you. You have played a lot of a Final Fantasy XI without installing the game. Congratulations.
Okay. And I didn't have to de-level. So
you go. Yeah, dying doesn't de-level you 3 times.
Well, you know, I'm guessing, do you think a lot of this is going to play into the Alliance coming up as well? So they're going to try to make this kind of build off into that?
So, yes and no, because they use the story from Rise of the Zealart building into Tulia as inspiration. I'm saying that knowing fully that that's hearsay, but it is just like the parallels are very, very strong. It is kind of the story based on interpretation. I'm not saying this. I don't know shit about the development design, right? This is my analysis. I think that they are going to be leaning more into the expansion that immediately comes after Rise of the Zealart, because there's so many hints in side quests and like the actual world building elements. I think Yoctel is a great example of that. Earth and Shire, a lot of the crafting quests, they mention locations in Final Fantasy XI, like one for one, Moval Polos being the big one, that are specific to it's specific to Chains of Promothia, which is heralded as like the favorite for Final Fantasy XI. So I think that that's the one they're leaning into, which I would be happy about because it's also one of my favorites. So
nice.
Okay. All right. Well, while we're talking about like them integrating 11 and things from that in the story, one of the things a lot of people were looking forward to was the 9 integrations. And so, you know what? We haven't heard from Moose in a bit. We could ask Moose. Do you have any thoughts on 9 integrations within the story? Yeah. How'd you feel about it? Did it live up to you?
Let me look into my like lived experiences of Final Fantasy 9. Oh right, I was 9.
Oh wow.
There.
I need to go back and play 9 again, because like when I played it, I was I was pretty young, and I think my most salient memory of it was just like the proportions on these characters are a little weird. They look kind of like cartoons. Like I don't remember a lot of deep lore from 9. Like I studied a good chunk of it when we were coming up to it, because if you remember when we did the last show, we were talking about all the different possibilities of what like the mysterious or the enigmatic maiden symbol could mean. And I mean, we actually picked up pretty early on the fact that they were kind of like infinity symbols and something that looked like the Alexander symbol and like the connection to the flag. And like, we actually picked up on a good chunk of it. We didn't fully predict what it meant, obviously. But I went back and I studied a lot of that stuff from 9, and I think like some of it was just really cool to see in 14 graphics. Like especially the dungeon.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, dungeon was gorgeous.
Yeah. So with low experience with 9, did it seem apparent when it happened though? Like it was Otis? Did you recognize Otis?
Oh yeah, the Steiner reference there.
Well,
right?
Moose, did you recognize anything about Otis?
No, not right away. No.
Oh. Okay.
It's been a hot minute since I played that.
Okay. All right.
I was very okay, but I have not been. All right. Well, hold on.
Well, I wanted to ask you as someone who wasn't.
I've always liked.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I've always liked stories. I've always been very big into stories and world settings. I did not become like a Final Fantasy story person. All right, let me put it this way. I didn't become a Final Fantasy person until 10. So like 7, 8, and 9 were games that my cousins had. Like I would go over to my cousin's house and I would see them on the PlayStation. Then I played 10 and I was like, 10 is a good game. I like 10. And then I got 12. And I was like, all right, now I'm a Final Fantasy fan because I played 10, 12, and Tactics back to back. I often joke that Yasumi Matsuno-san is like the person who made me a Final Fantasy fan. But after I have beaten all of those and got really into the lore of those, I have not gone back and built up my lore repertoire of like 7, 8, and 9 at all.
Okay. Well,
I mean, the main thing was like soul experimentation, which is what we got.
Yep.
And then the debate of if Galulja is a mini clone of Zeralja or not, because that's also still a big question mark for us. Like theoretically they have the technology, but
if so, I'm still questioning if Zeralja was himself. Like they said he was an impossible child, the first child of a blessed sibling ever.
Right.
Like, are these technologies related? Did Galul Jaja do whatever Zeralja did?
Oh, I hadn't considered that. Thank you, Moose. That's going to keep me up tonight. Morbid, thank you.
No, it's just one of those that, you know, doesn't need like any kind of intercourse or anything to have more babies. They just pop them out. Eggs just pop out of them every once in a while, right?
Oh no.
But that's not how Mamul Jaw work. Like they had a whole series of quests establishing that.
Oh, well, how do they work?
You just like hook the egg up to a replicator.
Oh god, no.
Regulator, sorry.
Yeah, I was like, now I'm just thinking about the Stargate jokes about the bridge between worlds. You go through the Stargate, and you end up with a replicator. That's how it goes, right?
No.
So, real quick, somebody's mentioning in chat about how the map of living memory is a very close replica of the world map of FF9. I'm looking at it right now, and I can see the idea of it because it's like, you know, the 4 continents, each themed after an elemental.
Yes.
That's cool.
Did not make that connection until just right now, so that's
It's good.
I think Dawntrail is something we got to chew on because there's like all this is gonna start filtering through over time. We're gonna start seeing it like the marble. You ever play with the marble works? You know, that's just how it's gonna work. We're experiencing the trickle down of all this information because it's cool.
Part of my I don't have any big expectations and I'm just kind of taking it as it comes and not getting too invested in any one idea yet. Part of that for me is that I'm not going to form an opinion on the core main scenario narrative until X.3, just in case. You know, like what if we go back to the old style roadmap and this is actually going to become a much more cohesive story by the time we get to X.3.
I mean, that's a fair way to look at it, yeah.
It's also one of those things where we're having a reset of the story. We're starting a second arc. We're making a lot of connections here that are like, oh, that's cool. And we don't have any thesis attached to it because this is the groundwork for the next story arc. 10 years from now, we're going to look at Dawntrail and go, oh, I made a connection to this, but I didn't know why it was important because it hasn't come up yet. Likewise, there are like ideas that I personally have, and I'm sure y'all have, of like an idea of where the story could be going, how we'd like things to go, where we're seeing threads for that we can't necessarily follow up on yet because we don't have enough context to say anything for certain. It's a reset of like we're learning things again, we're asking questions.
Do you guys actually believe so this is the starting platform of all the stories that will come in the next 10 years, or is this like just an experience and we'll go to the next experience afterwards and there'll be like loose connections from this one to the next?
I want to say they want to try to do that thing. They're going back to their old model where the first 3 patches is like will be our closure that we are expecting right now. Like everyone's fresh off the boat, right? We're all experiencing this. Okay, what next, right? That answer will come in point 3. They did that with Shadowbring. I want to say I don't know when it started that specific model, but remember the Dragonsong War ends 2. The 3.3, and then 4.3 is when the Stormblood stuff got all resolved, and then they used those last 2 patches to merge into the next expansion. They had to stop it because of the pandemic, right? When all that stuff happened, they had to shut down studios. They had to change their entire development model. And I think they're trying to come back to the way it was pre-pandemic era. So we're probably going to go back to another 3 patches that'll explain things, or maybe 2.
I don't mean like in the next 3 patches. I mean in the next 5 expansions, right? And so is this the starting point of the next 5 expansions or 3 expansions or whatever else? Or is this really just an expansion that we'll just move on from to the next one?
Oh, that's a good one. Because I mean, everyone wants to go to Morass City too. So.
Yeah,
I think it's a little of column A, a little of column B.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think they're ever going to do another 10-year story because like the amount of struggle that you can see them going through from patch to patch. I mean, it's I give Endwalker a lot of wiggle room to include things I didn't expect and not include things I did expect, because you got to make a coherent story out of these 10 years. And, like there might be things that would have been more satisfying to include, or things that weren't as satisfying because they were included, but we had to, because that's where the story it needed to happen. There needed to be some connection to that part of the story. I often refer to Stormblood as the Growing Pains expansion, because that was the one that was responsible for tying together all the hooks that they threw out in 2.0 and 3.0 into a coherent story that we could get to an ending from, right? So I don't think they're ever going to do a 10-year story again, but I think there's at least we're going to be going through the next 2 years with some stuff that's connected to this, and maybe another expansion that still has some threads in this, but I don't think they're ever going to go 10 years again.
So why did we have
it's a long war
such a very long platform creating expansion where we're just starting fresh and learning about all these different things if we're just going to do that again in the next expansion?
Well, because again, we were talking about the reset thing earlier, and they have talked about they are going to be doing a second big arc. 10 years, we don't know, but we know that they do have at least a few through lines planned. But like Moose said, these expansions have to be able to stand on their own too, right? That's a critical part of like telling a story. Because even going back to ARR and Heavensward and Stormblood, like they eventually did have to tie those together, but a lot of it was going back and looking at threads that they could tie together. The writing team is really, really good at doing that. Endwalker is the only expansion we have that feels like a direct sequel to the one preceding it. And that's not to say that it couldn't stand on its own, but this is an MMO with one very big story. Like, it's impossible to take an expansion in isolation, because Dawntrail would make absolutely no sense if you took it in isolation from everything else, right? We're talking about different shards, we're talking about travel between them, we're talking about rejoining, we're talking about localized stuff like that. It's you can't take them entirely out of isolation. So do I think we're going to get the next expansion is going to be sequel to Dawntrail? No. But I think it's going to be a thing where we keep having to go back to it the same way that we still go back to Ishgard. It's the same way that we still go back to the conflict with Garlemald, right? That was a big thing in Endwalker, but like conflict with Garlemald was the central theme for Stormblood. There's things they have to keep going back to by nature of this being functionally its own living world, right? It's an MMO, but like the story is big enough and the writing team capable enough that they keep going back and say, what's a hook that we never followed up on, and how can we use it to tell the story that we want to tell now? And they are brilliant at piecing that together, because that's how we got Ardbert and his gang, and that ended up being one of the most beloved parts of Shadowbringers, right? They have the room to do something similar with something we totally don't expect from Dawntrail later down the line, and that's part of the fun of it, is we won't see it coming because maybe they don't have a plan yet, and maybe they do, and they're just really good at setting it up in the long term.
Okay. Well, if that's the case too, I mean, like, even just kind of focusing on this expansion in general, and I completely understand, and the point of waiting until point 3 to really get a full opinion on it. I'm a little bit harsher of a critic. I'm one of those that's like, you know what? I am not going to get the guy telling me that you should watch make it past the first 7 seasons. The 8th season is great. Right?
Yeah, that
I can't.
I hate when people say that.
I don't deal with that.
That's an awful way to introduce things. Yeah.
Yeah, if Lord of the Rings, the first movie, didn't hold you, then are you going to go watch the second and the third one? I don't know. It's just one of those things where, like, it has to be able to stand on its own throughout most of the points, like going through the story and the experience. It can't be one of those things that, like, you have to just make it through it. And that's the criticism A Realm Reborn got a lot back in the day too, is that you just have to make it through A Realm Reborn, right?
Yeah.
Even though it was good, it just wasn't like what a lot of people were looking for when they started a new game. And they wanted to jump into the adventure with their friends. But yeah.
That also just never made a lot of sense to me, but I'm also coming from the place of, I've played a lot of MMOs, but I had not played a lot of RPGs, specifically JRPGs, at the time I started the game. ARR was so far above like the quality of anything else I had experienced starting an MMO in the past, where I was like, why do people say this is bad? How good is this going to get? And I'm still of the opinion, because it does what it's supposed to do. It's the start of an MMO, and then you can go do other stuff, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But this isn't the start of an MMO, even though
right.
you could
Right,
say
yeah,
it's the start of the next story. We're not at the start anymore.
That's what I'm saying, right? We're at the start of the next story, but like it's not like the starting point of a story, because it's springboarding off of all previous expansions, like all previous expansions have springboarded off of the rest of them, you know?
Yeah.
I'm excited for MogTalk 2020, or not MogTalk, Frosty Mog 2026.
No, it's MogTalk. The podcast is still MogTalk, guys. It's still MogTalk. The channels and the branding is Frosty Mog.
I'm excited for 2026, where we get together and you tell us that, you know, in 2024 I said, you know, I played the whole story through and I thought I should have skipped it, and this time I skipped a lot of stuff, and I wish I hadn't.
So someone's clipping that right now so we can make the edit, right?
I don't predict the game anymore, but I'm going to predict Frosty. I'm going to predict that Frosty's going to have a crisis of conscience. He's going to skip some stuff, and then he's going to be like, "What the hell's going on?"
Is that your lore prediction for 8.0?
Oh god, dude! No, I can't skip it. I can't. The only way that I would skip it is if I would never talk about lore again. So if you guys, maybe we'll cancel lore shows. You never get to escape that with me. I don't know. I don't know. I'm glad I experienced it so I could talk about it. That's about it. To be fair, and again, I don't want to bash a story completely. There's a lot of good stuff I pulled from it that appealed to me. And there's just a lot of stuff that I think with just that they got. I feel like they got so comfortable being such like a leader in the MMO market. They are a leader in the MMO market. WoW's a leader in it. Final Fantasy 14's a leader in it. All right, and they just went so much into just rehashing the standard design of go pick up 3 things here, come back and talk to me some more, right? And they didn't try to advance the enjoyment factor of experiencing a new expansion. And like just
that core gameplay loop.
Yeah, they didn't like look into that at all. And I don't know. I can't not criticize it, right? Because it's kind of obvious to a lot of people. But I know if you're just going through and you're like just experiencing the story and you don't really care about the gameplay part of it, it's great. Especially like there's a lot of really good cultural representation within the zones and everything that they knocked out. I feel like the world building and I feel like all the shit that goes on in the background, the clay, the whatever that they work and they mold with, that's some really good stuff. I just feel like the writing and how they experienced it going through, something like went wrong there. And it could be what Moose was talking about too, right? But like there is a lot of really good material for them to work with. I just wish that it was worked with a little bit better, if that makes any sense. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, it's the nature of a video game. Oh, the gameplay is great, dude. Like, seriously, I'm having the most fun I've ever had, raiding in this game and everything else. But we had nine dungeons, and so, or 6 or 7, however, I don't know. I can't count. Sorry, guys.
We had a chunk of dungeons.
We had a good chunk of dungeons and a good chunk of, like, instances to do and trials to kind of go through, and they did pretty good with all of that, and it felt like such a drag to get from one thing that I really enjoyed to get to the next thing to enjoy. So I guess that might be another part of it, right? I experienced the dungeon, I experienced all this stuff, like I'm going through all the story, I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta build up and go through the beginning part so I can get into the gameplay. Then I play it through a dungeon. Crap, it's been 20 minutes, it's over. Okay, let's go back through another 2-3 hours of just dialogue and story and moving and collecting Aether Currents into a dungeon, right? All right, another 20 minutes and then back to it. And like the overworld gameplay like didn't even exist. at all for me. And so, yeah, I mean, we could go back on that a billion times over. It's always going to be the same opinion.
Right.
And I feel like most people agree with it, right? At least if you're putting it in perspective, the gameplay was really good and there could have been more, and there could have been more interactions. No one can say no, there shouldn't have been, right? I feel like most people will still enjoy it without those things, but some people don't enjoy it without those things.
Yeah.
Right. So, but going back to just discussing the story in general and our whole experience and the characters, did you guys like all of the characters, or was there like one you're like, I could have gone without?
That feels like a loaded question.
It feels a little loaded, doesn't it? Yeah.
Oh boy.
All right.
Is there like one specific character?
You don't have to pin it on one specific. You can just give some general opinions on a couple of people in the story. You know, you don't have to be like, I hated Walk Lamont. You don't have to say that, right? You can say whatever you want.
All right, cool. We'll start with Kryle.
Sounds good.
I say that mainly because Kryle up until now has always been someone that I felt like I've had a different perspective on. Like usually she's kind of like aloof and sassy, and if you listen to the story behind her about like how she developed the Echo and how it affected her, like she spent all of like her childhood in high school feeling how people felt and knowing what they were really thinking. Could you imagine going back to high school and feeling all of your peers' feelings and knowing what they were really thinking?
I did that.
Like that was hell. That had to be hell. And we see that it's hell when we see it on Fordola, right? So this expansion with like Kryle's vulnerability, like especially with the voice acting, like they knocked it out of the park for Kryle. So in terms of like thinking about individual characters, that was the one that really stood out to me. But are we specifically talking about like only negative reactions or standing out in any way whatsoever?
Whatever you want to talk about. Literally, the show is MogTalk. You talk about what you want to talk about, man. It's whatever. So if you want to say, man, I can't believe the community likes Baklakajul, whatever, right? Jaja, it's crazy that they like that guy. He's horrible and I hate him. You'll have people unfollow you, but you can say that, right? You could say he's just an ugly lizard, and people would they'd hate you for it, but and unfollow you, but it's fine.
I still respect you even if we disagree.
we can parachute into the Wuklamat discourse.
Sure.
By me highlighting that I thought it was very, very funny next to the existence of Galul Jaja. Because like a lot of the maybe we'll call them questions about Wuklamat that I saw. In terms of like the narrative, like personality wise, and is she fit to rule, and is she going to be a good ruler for Tyrol? Like her dad's the same, like her adopted dad is basically the same guy. Like
yeah, just age with experience, right? Seasoned with lots and lots of experience. Yeah.
He's the same exact person with like a lot more wisdom. So like I'm gonna go back to something.
Well, he lost that, right?
Yeah,
he lost the logical side. He did.
That was wild.
Rude.
Let me go back to something we were talking about earlier when we were talking about the pacing.
Wow.
The pacing and the cycle. Like when Wuklamat comes into a situation, she goes in with an open mind. She replaces any judgment or criticism with curiosity. Great approach, right? And then, but like instantly, by just talking to a couple of people and looking around, comes to this scientifically accurate, culturally sensitive, practically useful solution that no one's ever thought of before, and everyone just leaps right on board. There's no resistance, there's no bias, there's no, everyone jumps right on board. And that was really easy to swallow when it was a parade float. And then we got
Yeah.
we got to a part of the story where it was like the same amount of time, the same approach, the same effort solved like the entire cultural trauma, maladaptive tradition history of Mamuk and their inability to survive in the forest. And I was like,
right.
It was a lot easier to swallow when it was a parade float.
Yeah.
But when I go back and I look at Galul Jaja, that's basically what he did. You could hear the dog whining in the background. He's very upset. I don't know why. He's having a good day. If you hear any whining in the background, that's just the dog being dramatic.
Okay, fair.
But if you look at Galul Jaja, what did he do? He wandered around, took a look at what was going on, made some observations. Everyone was like, "You're right." So apparently, that's just what Tyrol needs. That's what they like. That's what works. And I think part of the ritual, the rite of succession, was that it was going to take 4 people who were not ready for that and maybe mold 1 or 2 into someone who was ready for that. Someone who could go to places with an open mind, listen to what was going on, respect the culture that they were listening to, and then just throw out some ideas and see, hey, could this work? Here are some resources. What are we going to do? And we got 2 people who did that. So I don't think I think Vuk Lamat is a little easier to swallow when it comes to looking at Galul Jaja's approach.
Yeah, and it's a lot of what you're talking about, but also the whole point is that she's naive and that she needs to learn these things. That's why the rite of succession exists, right? Because it was to try and shape his kids and Bakul Jaja into someone who would be fit to rule. But at the end of it, Kona was like, I cannot handle this on my own. I am not a person who should be in the position where I am the only person making decisions, because I cannot approach things with both cultural sensitivity but also like rationally, because he starts recognizing his own biases. There's a lot of niche character things at work on really more of a macro level. Yeah, like that was so important to his character, because at that point in time, until then, I was like, I didn't respect him, because I was like, what are you doing? You were from this place and you're trying to override all of these cultures. Like there's a lack of respect for tradition that he was like, oh, I can make changes while still having respect for tradition. Versus Wuklamot being in the other camp of everything, where she's like, oh, everything should be by the book. I agree that the Mamuk thing should probably have at least taken a few months, because doing that in 2 hours was way too much to rewrite like centuries of tradition.
Yeah.
Right? But she had to confront in that moment, oh, things can't always just be this is how it's always been done and this is how it should be done. Sometimes change is good, and she had to confront that in that moment. So having that be the interaction between her and Kona, they balance each other out, not just because of the way that they parallel their father, but also because that is the parallel of their characters, right? Both of them are flawed. Neither of them are fit to rule on their own. And the fact that they can recognize that in different ways, that was kind of the part where they came together. So I personally, I was talking about this earlier, I love all the characters that were introduced for this reason, is the way that their arcs kind of worked. But specifically Wuklamot and Kona, the way they play off of each other and end up together, I thought it was brilliant. I had no notes on that. The pacing, yes. Very much the pacing, yes. But the way it ended up, it worked perfectly for the characters. They were exactly what they needed to be. Again, not everyone's cup of tea, but like as far as the story goes, it's what they were supposed to be, and they did brilliantly.
You know what's funny? Like the Wuklamot stuff, like I was completely fine with the character. I literally had no problems. I was just like, this is who they want to be in the story. This is how they are supposed to react. This is just the story. This is part of it.
It works.
Right.
Yeah. It's I understand some of the frustrations with it, but it never occurred to me while I was going through the story that it was a problem. It was just me being bored. That was the problem, right? That was the main issue.
That's fine. It wasn't for you.
Yeah, and I really didn't mind at the end of the day, because I know that at least somebody probably enjoyed it in some way, but with some of the characters, let me see, the Sveen is one of those that has been discussed a lot as well throughout the community. And it is very easy to relate her to Insinger kind of narrative stuff. How did you guys? Well, I mean, like, come in big, whatever. But how did you guys feel about Sveen's introduction to the story?
Sveen.
I treated the whole thing as a joke, actually.
Okay.
So
interesting.
Yeah, I saw the concept art for Sveen, and then I watched the story trailer, and the story trailer has her at the end going, "Could you have done it without sacrifice?" And this little, like, just the character design and that quote in my head just flicked a switch of, oh, villain. And
Yeah.
so
lo and behold, yeah.
As soon as she walked onto the screen, I was just like, villain.
Sword.
And
yeah, you're like ready.
Everything she said, everything she did, I just turned it into a joke of how can I find the most bad faith way to interpret this possible to try to predict how she's going to become the villain. And I think she had such grace and politeness and like the way she interacted with everyone and made people like her. I think the number one thing I said throughout the entire story over and over was, yeah, we get it. You went to finishing school. And it was just a hunt for how she was going to throw me and everyone I love in the soul juicer. And I ended up like getting pretty close through that approach, so it became an even bigger joke through that. And that, I mean, that was just my whole journey with Sveen, I think.
Just comic like, I get it.
And just every time she came on screen, I'd go and try to figure out like how she was going to screw me over in 10 minutes.
Right.
Yeah. It just you could always tell. I think that was completely intentional though, right? Within the story writing and everything, you were supposed to always feel, yeah. Supposed to be
it's uncanny valley.
Yeah.
That's I like that. Yeah.
So I think they did that pretty well. But I don't know. I thought she was fine in the story. I wish it wasn't just like, again, it just feels like leaving one completely different story to another, and I felt more invested in what was going on in that story, and I felt like I was cheated. Right? I felt like that should have happened way earlier. Earlier in the story.
There's one thing I should I actually noticed that I thought was really interesting while I was playing on Dawntrail. I don't know if this happens on the PC side of things. I play on console, but the PlayStation was like marking my progress, like gave me a percentage progress of how far I was in Dawntrail, and I thought I was like, oh cool, I can measure this. There's a measurable value, right? Of what the story or where you're at in the story when you're playing it on PS5. And I found out that apparently there's 4 parts. Dawntrail is supposed to be 4 arcs. And then there's they actually had because that's the thing I've noticed, like a lot of people say part 1, part 2. It's 4 parts. According to PlayStation 5. So it's like,
okay.
Yeah. So honestly, in that perspective, I really wonder if it was like, if we took it in that sense, understood how PlayStation is pointing out as 4 parts, and divided that 4 parts into its own little things, and then kind of reviewed it that way, would it make it more sense? Does the pacing feel better that way with 4 parts instead of 2? I don't know. I got to go back over it because I just remember I have that vague memory of it.
Yeah,
let us know where the break is. Yeah,
I got to find where the break is because I recorded all of it. I recorded all of it, so I got to find it. So, yeah, but the PS5 says there's 4. The game is supposed to be a 4-parter, so I gotta figure out where they cut it up and see if that makes it better in terms of transitional experience.
If I had to assume, it would be right after the 2 zones that you go into at first, and you start going into the dungeons, or it's like the beginning, right? And then you start getting into it, and then the meat of it all the way to the conclusion of maybe the
part 1 is generally seen as. Yeah,
and then the second part kind of is. Yeah, I don't know how to, because it really feels like one part.
I have to dig it up.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm gonna have to
I
dig it
feel
up.
like it's exposition, trauma, lead up into the next arc,
More trauma.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's, again, I kind of like was going into it like knowing all of these quotes and kind of seeing the threads, and I'm like, they're not actually going to do this. Until I stepped foot in the final zone, I still didn't believe that they were actually going to do what they did. And they ended up doing it, and that's kind of like Sveen to me ended up being Ealdon Arsh, who was the villain in Rise of the Zealert. So I was like, oh,
Nice.
I see the parallel. But I will say, my first reaction, like our first few conversations with her, I was like, oh, thank God she's not an Ascian. I don't have to cosplay her. Like, genuine sigh of relief. Because I didn't buy into that theory, but I had to address it because everyone was like, Em's got another cosplay. And I'm like, no, I don't know.
Okay. You know,
Incredible.
I want to talk about Arcadion too, but before we dive too much into that too, just in case, I want to specifically ask your opinions on Arizona and kind of what your thoughts were on it. Like, did you think that it was just kind of out of place, or did it feel like just right? I mean, it was just kind of a fun area to experience.
Right.
What's the thoughts on Arizona?
I feel like I feel like they just really wanted to do a Wild West Zone at some point, and they just have never had the chance. And then they realized, wait a second, this is it, everybody. We can do the Wild West Zone that we've always wanted. And this was just like the time. And so we got to play Final Fantasy XIV Wild West, right? It's just, or Weird West. I mean, that's what I was calling it. It's like it's this fantasy version of our stereotypical tropes of what happens when you're in the pioneers, right, and all that stuff. And what I always have to, I'm silly with it, right? But I got really excited to find out that Shaloni had a massive amount of dinosaurs in the zone, right? That being both a reference to the fact that North America does have a lot of dinosaur fossils, right? So I was like, oh my gosh, thanks devs for recognizing that. Also, Banrio's a huge dinosaur nerd, so of course when he can do it, he's going to do it. If you see a dinosaur in the game, that's probably Banrio's fault. They mentioned that like years ago. He was like, "Oh, I love dinosaurs," and so that's why.
My daughter loves them too, dude.
It's like and they put in dinosaur references, but not only did they put in dinosaur references by itself, they used indigenous terms to name these dinosaurs. So then I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to learn a new language. Like I'm like Shaloni was very interesting in how it was presented because it is really easily a sharp drop from what we were getting used to, right? Like because like Yaktheral is waterfalls, colors, plants, joy. Everyone's dancing. There's just like the town theme is jazz, right? Yeah. It's just like there's this like really exciting energy that exists in the southern half of the story. But then the moment you cross that bridge, it's like down here in the west, it's like down here in the wilds. We do, we shoot each other to prove. And it's like, what? Like, where did that go? Like, you're realizing there's a big, like, I guess if anything, that bridge does separate them like by a large amount. Like not even just by the distance, but like their cultures are so different because of that gap, that huge crack in the earth that we surprisingly they decided to reference Zodiac and Highland and then not elaborate. They mentioned it once of all times, and then let's move on, guys. And I'm like, wait, no.
Talk about the crack at all. We spent so long trying to figure out what it was. They're like,
one time.
There's a bridge. That's it.
So like we think our gods are down there, yeah, and we say great sunken gods as an expletive, but we're not going to actually explain what we mean by that. And then you're like, don't just tell me. Like you're already telling me everything else. Why can't you tell me that?
It's the alliance raid. It's the alliance raid.
Yeah,
I was about to say save it for the alliance raids. Yeah, that's Prometheus down there. Don't ask any questions.
Yeah. But okay. Well, Moose, Sim, your thoughts on the Wild West?
I approached it probably the exact opposite of how I approached Sveen. I took it totally at face value. Like I just the right of succession was over. So the story
out.
was over as far as the characters were concerned. We knew we were only half done with the story. We knew we were only level 95. The characters didn't know the story wasn't over. I did. I knew that.
Mhm.
But, Aaronville didn't know that the story wasn't over. The Rite of Succession was over. And we knew that there was more story coming. But as far as the story was concerned, this was just a little post-vacation whatever trip, a little sabbatical with our friend Aaronville, totally not Ellen Eshbia, Aaronville. And so I just took it totally at face value, and I went on my little yeehaw trip with my buddy.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm glad y'all kind of recontextualized that for me, because I was very much in the boat of this feels like a weird pacing shift. Like, that was the only part where I was like, okay, can we get back to what we were building up to?
No,
and I think that's
right.
part of, like, I could kind of feel like what was coming, kind of what Moose was saying level wise, but I was like, okay, I know something big. There are certain things that I'm seeing that are pointing in a very specific direction, and I want to see if it's actually going to turn out that way or not. I'm wondering how much of my disconnect was also like me living in the heart of the Bible Belt, suddenly seeing a Makote use a very deeply Southern accent that just shook me.
That's so wild.
That was the point where I was like, all right, it's late enough. I'll go grab a beer. I need something. Because it was like, just the howdy. I couldn't handle that. That took me a minute to kind of register.
That's just.
I lived in Texas for several years, and so like I show up in Shaloni, and I'm like, it's like I'm pretty sure I heard that someone sound just like that right down my street.
Yeah,
I'm like, what?
Right.
Like,
I enjoyed it for what it was, but there was very much a lot of, okay, Catboy with a super Southern accent. My brain can't process that. I'm sorry.
Give me a second. That's a whole new thing I gotta process now.
Yeah, that was the biggest revelation for me, was Catboys can have a Southern accent. That was the one I wasn't ready for.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Go ahead.
The last thing though, I don't know why did they not reference the Willaki more. I saw that one time that Aaronville mentions the Willaki. And then I was just like, okay, you spent 3 expansions building up the Blue Mage stuff. We have all these Blue Mage references. You're super excited to meet the original Blue Mages. At least I was, right? I had hoped to at least get some visual of the Lapis Canyon at all. I don't know.
I can make up an excuse, but it's probably not accurate.
Okay. I don't know. It was just so weird to just see that one time mention, and then it's like, all right, next. And I'm like, wait, no. Blue Mage, you've been doing this since Shadowbringers. Where are the Blue Mages at? Come on, this is your time. This was your time.
When we saw the art for the zone, I thought it was a given we were going to be running into them.
Yeah,
and
right. Exactly.
I was expecting zone like. I thought the second half of the zone was we move on from the little Wild West town and then go meet the Willaki. And even when we met like other people, they weren't of the Willaki. And I was like, huh, that's weird. And as I understand it, I haven't done it yet, but as I understand it, we run into them in the crafting scenario a bit.
Yeah, there's
so many.
I think if I were to try to make an excuse for it, it would be to. If I were going to try to make an excuse for it, it would be to that maybe they wanted to avoid the sense of like they're leading too hard on one tribe when Native American culture was super diverse.
And they did a great job
tribes, right?
Yeah.
So maybe they just wanted to give an idea that like, yeah, you might know the name of one tribe, but that doesn't really represent everything, right? There's a lot of tribes here, so maybe that's what they were leaning on. I don't know.
But Lapis Canyon sounds awesome.
Right, they could also just be saving it for patch content or when like Blue Mage leveling reaches the point where it's like, okay, you're in the 90 to 100, go to Tyrol and actually get there, right?
Someone at SE is probably going to watch this like, you'll see it in the Blue Mage quest. Like,
yeah, right?
What are you talking about, Blue Mage? We're getting Beastmaster. We don't care about Blue Mage.
I know, they just forget. Blue Mage never... Watch Blue Mage become the next Diadem. They just don't do anything. It just floats away.
Like Chocobo Racing, the next Lords of Verbinion, the next
No.
Oh God. I mean, that's as good a segue into Arcadion as ever, because the whole Blue Mage stuff in 11 was about absorbing beast souls until your soul became corrupted, and you turned into something irreplaceable. It's very much ringing a bell for anyone who's done the raids so far.
I do want to start this off with like noting Moose did Arcadion last night.
I know that was the best. Like, talk about the best timing. He's got the freshest opinion right now. Like,
So, coming off of that, without literally any time to think about it or let it churn in your brain, Moose, what are your thoughts on Arcadian?
Jerk opinion. Okay. So I had an expectation of the story going into it, and the expectation was just there's going to be like Beast Souls, and there's going to be a tournament arc, and it's probably going to be pro wrestling. And I was like, I'll take what I get. And I wasn't like super excited for it. I wasn't super down on it. And as I was playing it, I thought like, this execution is really good. Like it went at a good pace. It only took me 2 hours to get through, and yet in that 2 hours, I met 4 of the coolest NPCs I've ever met, and we saw like a total co-opting of everything related to pro wrestling, from building personas that you have to keep in public to like the build up of the new baby face against the champion heel, the sudden return of the old champion, the intervention of the CEO to allow matches that shouldn't happen. Like it was all there. Like I imagine they're saving the ladder match and the steel chair shots for the other two sections, but yeah, I thought my first impression was just that was really well executed, and I expect this to maybe not tie too deeply into the world setting, but still probably deliver 12 of the coolest NPCs I've ever seen.
Nice.
You know, Moose, do you care about Savage spoilers at all?
No, go ahead, spoil me.
Okay, I don't think it was in normal mode for M3.
It's not. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
they did really good with like the enrages and stuff. And the enrage has him coming down and doing like, I think it's like, is it an elbow drop or something in the center of the arena or something?
Yeah, you see his shadow and then you wipe. Because he's like leaving the arena to like hit the net and jump on you. You see the shadow and the screen goes black. It's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a top rope jump down into the arena, and so belly flop. Yeah, and so they leaned real hard into it, which is surprising to me. But I guess they just wanted to have fun, you know.
I think when I saw the gear was peak, like what you let a pro wrestler design.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, that aesthetic was on point for sure.
So I think it was kind of neat to... It's complete deviation, I think. It felt like, at least, not really, but like more comical than what we were experiencing just now, right? But then they threw in that edge of like seriousness at the very, very end of it afterwards, about needing to what was it? The retired, the retired wrestlers basically just go insane or something. I actually forget a little bit.
Well, it was
the soul
corruption. Was actually probably that was one of the coolest connections I thought there was like it not only went into the bombastic coolness of pro wrestling, it also went into the fact that like this industry is going to chew you up and spit you out,
which is very similar to how it is IRL, which is interesting.
Right.
They and the whole focus they had with the souls, like, I mean, we're competing to freshen up things, right? We're trying to, because this is where it kind of gets more like on the lore aspect of things. Even though it had that pro wrestling aesthetic, it's just a very, you know, cool thing and it's a fun gameplay experience. There's like those little bits I enjoyed that they referenced. For example, the whole reason they're starting this again is because Sven's death is the first death that every single Alexandrian is experiencing for the past 30-something odd years. I don't even know how long they've not had an awareness of a death. And then this first death that is the one that they are finally aware of is their queen, right? It's made them all miserable. So the populace as a whole is just, I mean, they're in that doldrums. So the Arcadian's being started to spark everything up. So they're just going to go right into it. And then I saw the mentions that they're like, yeah, you know, the Arcadian's based on an older tradition of our people fighting in the tournaments. And that brings back what we learned about the Milala. They attach that to the Arcadian. Like, that's a future version of what we saw back there. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's cool, right? You know, the competitors are of both Alexandrian and Thorali descent, right? You know, you learn one uses the name from like a Thorali name, and the other one uses a Alexandrian name, and you see how those cultures are affecting and bouncing off of each other still in the Arcadian. It was just like those, they're dropping those little bits here and there that I was like, you know what, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But
and
again,
it's
like, yeah, it's fun too, right?
it's just straight up fun, and we're still getting those little character choices, like lore wise too. We can talk about they're kind of like choosing their own songs. If Honeybee is any indication, there's themes in M1 where she took parts of her sister's theme song, and that plays when you fight Black Cat and Wicked Thunder. There's some of the same theme elements there, but also like the Savage version of Wicked Thunder answers a few questions we had about Electrope and whether or not it can conduct other types of ether too. So it's the little fun things that are sprinkled in there, tying up loose ends. But also the whole premise of us going in is, hey, if you compete, if you win enough, we'll release some souls. You can kind of help end
we're soul
it, right?
liberating.
How come you have the decision-making power on that? Like, how come you specifically are able to
choice you're allowed to make?
Right? Yeah. So there's more to Matad that meets the eye.
Like, why don't I just storm this whole building right now? Like, if you're holding, like, you do know who I am, right? Like,
the intervention of the CEO is going to be part of the drama. Like,
right? Oh yeah.
I look forward to
the final fight. The final fight's going to be CEO. It's going to be. If they don't do the thing they did in Nier with the actual CEO coming down, like
it's exactly that, because it was the whole thing of, okay, it starts at the start and it's like there's 3 fights and then you're done, and you're like, okay, but raids have 4 fights, so the intro had to be something like a last minute competitor, right? I would love for a boss where a fight starts and then the health bar is like 70% of the way down, and the CEO is like, no, it's my turn, to just flings whatever your opponent is out of the arena, and you see the health bar refill to 100, and it's like, this is your actual opponent, have fun. That would be like some of the narrative fun things that they have the room for at Arcadian, just because of the way they set it up.
Friend of mine actually created a OC boss, which is it's just that aesthetic. That's right? Cool. And basically their version of what they would consider how they would play it out. And they mentioned about switching souls mid-fight. Like you go for phase 1, you're a certain type of soul, and then you're like, you know what, we're fixing this, and then you swap to a different animal mid-fight, and then all the mechanics are different now. Yeah. And I was like, that's so cool, I love this. And I'm pretty sure if they don't do that, they're going to miss out, because I mean, that's an option. But there's so many different options now.
I would love that, yeah.
With regulator combat has changed a lot of things, how we understand people can operate in the world of Final Fantasy. Yeah, I don't know, that's what I call it, regulator. Because I mean, you're using
perfect.
Right? Yeah.
Right.
And no, it was really neat. I got really invested in the concept of it and just what they were doing with all the souls. And this is probably absolutely wrong. I'm not even going to stand on this in terms of like, this is my foundation, but it's like, when I heard the word psychonecrosis and how they explained it, all of a sudden it kind of made La Habrea's issue make sense. Because,
yes.
that, like, because I know it was technically villain rot. It's they left him alone for a really long time. So then they introduced Emmett Selk, and you're like, wow, Emmett Selk was great. What the heck happened to La Habrea? And then they explain it by saying, well, La Habrea overworked himself, but they don't really elaborate that. They're like, Emmett Selk's like, yeah, dude, he just kept jumping bodies over and over, and then he wasn't himself anymore by the end of it. Psychonecrosis is a great explanation for that. I mean, let's go. Like, I'll just take it, right? I'm like,
and because he also the whole foundation for the constellation crystals was La Habrea cutting out a piece of his own soul to start with. Like, it's not like he was 100% whole at that point. Sorry, I'm just losing it at Moose laughing at me being excited.
I know. That's what I'm saying. This is why I'm not going to say this is the
I'm laughing at me as much as this.
This is just a prediction. I'm like, you know what? That's a kind of cool way to explain what we were trying to learn
it's kind of the same thing, right? Yeah, I'm right there with you, dude.
So,
what were you saying? And then you're laughing at what?
So I'm laughing. I'm laughing as much at myself as those theories, because like usually what happens is I let my brain wander and I come up with really cool ideas that probably aren't true, and then I shut them all down. I go, I don't want to be that guy.
They sit up there, man.
I don't want to be that guy who had a couple cool ideas and spent too much time on Wikipedia and has convinced myself that there are all these connections that are totally, it's all but confirmed. It's all connected.
What's your favorite word? Moose, what's your favorite word?
Apophenia.
Apophenia. I love that word so
Called
much.
apophenia, seeing connections where they don't exist. And I'm so afraid of being that guy because like there's so much apophenia in the lore where people are like, oh yeah, it's all but confirmed that this thing
it's going to
made
happen,
up.
right?
And I don't want to be that guy. So what happens is I filter all of it out. And then I forget that I ever had any of the cool thoughts. And then you guys come up with all these cool thoughts that I hadn't even considered. And I realized that my brain just went, oh, it's magic CTE, and moved on with my life. So I'm laughing at me as much as these ideas because I never even made it to La Habrea because I shut myself down.
Right.
Well,
no, you must embrace Apollo, Moose. You must join us in the pit. You must join us in the pit of prophecy.
Yes. Or heck, Ares. If they mention Ares, that would be funny. That would,
so
a god of war being in charge of this whole thing.
I'm gonna get a little too into like the connections for a theory, and I'm gonna think like, oh, all these things connect, it's so perfect. And then someone's gonna be like, oh yeah, Moose said it's totally canon that, and then it's gonna be like accepted as canon, and I'm gonna find it on the fandom wiki, and it's just gonna be like the past repeating and all my fault. And I get so nervous about like accidentally introducing things that I just kind of shut myself down until I can build up a good precedent for it.
I mean, the last time we talked about this was like in the first episode we did as like us four, where I was talking about Ultima for the Arcadion, and I am still feeling relatively confident about that with my boy Gabro, because he came up and he's like, oh yeah, I'm an artist, I draw cartoons based on this, and I'm like, okay.
I thought he was going to be the president.
On a level. He still could be, because he's very much just kind of chilling outside, unlocking the Savage raids for us, which was kind of disappointing to me, because it means we're probably not going to get to fight him, and that made me sad.
Yeah. Well, he came in and he was like, yeah, I'm an artist. Nice to meet you. I'll be over here. I was like, okay, I'm going to forget you exist, and then you're going to like screw me over in 3 months. But then he turned out to be the Savage unlock, and I was like, oh, well, maybe not.
Right. Yeah, and he has, even if you're not planning on doing the Savage content, I highly recommend you unlock them, because he has new dialogue after the fact. He doesn't just repeat the same thing. He has whole new conversation for you. And it evokes the Wandering Minstrel, it evokes a few other things, but I am still very much in the camp of there's an Ultima man here. And that's mostly also because I felt the pull of you have to cosplay this man, and that usually means an Ascian is involved somewhere. So we don't know this for certain yet, but I'm still banking on it.
Okay.
Does he have a shadow?
Right.
Why can't this be reliable
this would be
anymore?
The time they could do this,
Once upon a time,
but he's standing in his shadows. We can't tell.
Once upon a time, what?
All right. In the core lore of the game, Ascians aren't supposed to have shadows. They're never supposed to have shadows. If an Ascian is possessing someone, they're supposed to still be shadowless. And in A Realm Reborn, the mechanics for that were just abandoned. And I think I found out later that even in 1.0, there were multiple NPCs that were supposed to be shadowless, and the code only worked on one of them. So I will never know who the other Ascians were supposed to be, because only Travanche had it work. I think it was Korgwavai and Dunstan, but Korgwavai got thrown under the Ascian bus. He was an Ascian as of the art book.
And then I don't think Travanesh?
Travanche or something like that.
Travanche,
yeah.
He got referenced in Alexander. And then I think Dunstan was supposed to be the third, but then Dunstan got retconned into like a hero of the Calamity. So I doubt they're ever going to confirm that if it's true or false. But yeah, once upon a time, we could have just looked for shadows and been like, we got you.
So
we would be debating which Ascian.
Is there some kind of conspiracy theory that we can link to, a Scion, like completely, or Ascian completely like just doing this tournament to burn through souls and create some sort of calamity, soul-related thing?
So for me, this is more, we know that the reason the whole storm surge happened is because they had to cause a calamity in order to rejoin the shard, right? And this is technically kind of done and dusted because we are rejoined on the source from the 12th. And what is left is like a facsimile of this civilization, right? My connection with Ultima has now gone more into kind of what I was talking about before, where I'm like, I don't think that this is an Ascian design. I think that this is remnants of them. Mostly, I think it would be funny if Gabbro is like this tortured artist who was never ascended to the seat of Ultima and just wakes up with like, there's a glyph in my mind and I'm going to draw it and that's going to be the logo for this thing, or I feel a compulsion to sow some sort of chaos and I don't know why, but I'm going to do it. I think it would be fun to see a shard of a Sundered Convocation member who isn't actually acting as an Ascian towards the Ardor, but is just living their life and does not understand why they're having these sorts of visions. But I also like, that's also leading into, I think as far as wrestling goes, I think it would be funny to have a tortured artist trope in there too, like in charge of the PR. Like it's exactly like tonally it fits Arcadian. So that's kind of the direction I'm leading to, because Ascians would take a look at living memory and what they're doing there, and they would find it an affront. I don't think that they could be responsible for it, just because it fundamentally goes against everything they believe to actually be life, you know?
Right, because they were trying to restore everything to the beginning,
it's
not
an affront.
keep it all the way, you know, keep it in that weird, like, graveyard style, you know.
Are we going to get the anti-Ascians?
That was Vana, honey.
Oh, okay.
The Shadow Convocation.
And the 12, you know.
That was Heideland.
You know, like.
Okay.
Is there, before
Anti-Ascian 2.
Oh, yeah.
Before I go
don't
into
know.
a weird, like, moose nitpick, is there any more on the Arcadian?
I mean, it was a really good opening, but I think we'll get more meat later on. They always do that.
What animals do you think we're going to be fighting?
Because what we did, bee, bomb,
bee.
I want the ferocious beaver.
Pearl thing.
Cat.
Ferocious beaver.
And then
just really big
steed.
Maybe a
I want
frog.
to, but that's selfish.
You know, it'd be weird. A really weird concept. They just suddenly threw it, like a dragon soul. It was just like one of them just suddenly has a dragon soul and is using it, and you're like, "Hey, give that back!" You're like, or if Beatra's like, "Hey, I heard something. Was that a dragon? Was that a dragon? I don't know. I didn't.
I mean, if you put it that way, when Istidian kind of took on a lot of Nidhogg's ether, that's essentially what he was doing. Using
and they reference it too. They reference it too because, like in like his side stories and stuff, the only reason why he went to mourn Ratatoskr was because he felt compelled to do so because of his Nidhogg. He was like, I don't know why I'm here, but I'm here. Here's a flower. You know, it's like he's being pushed and compelled to, you know, complete those like closure aspects of the Dragon Song War. And then that's when Hraesvelgr goes like, you know what? I appreciate this. Here's the OG Dragoon armor, and you're like, dang, this is cool. Like, but he's like, you know, he's like following in the footsteps. He's bringing Nidhogg's soul to a final rest this whole time. Like, you know, saying goodbye to his sister. You know, being able to find his brother. Like, I mean, I don't even think Nidhogg and Beathra ever had a chance to meet, let alone like, you know, interact in the way that like, because there is that recognition, but they don't talk about it. Like, oh yeah, I definitely hung out with. No, they were separated halfway, you know, miles away from each other. And what Beathra? I imagine Beathra was just depressed after his sister got pulled into the void. So it's like, you know, all that concept's there. Istidian is like connecting the family. the first brood are all becoming friends again and all meeting.
Yeah, the concept's
with
there.
each other. So that's what I'm seeing is like Nidhogg's still kind of there, but in a emotional sense, there's just this compulsion that pushes Istidian forward and where he does and what he does. So sold, yeah. Definitely regulated combat.
Yeah, right? It's adjacent. It's explaining some things retroactively. It's like what we were talking about earlier. Yeah.
Ether is a big plot device. They use it a lot, and it really, a lot of what we tend to get hung up on in explanations, it's just Ether. It really is this very very broad opportunity to manipulate the energy of the universe in various different ways. And now we have a new version of it. It's like this is how they're doing it. They're using souls to do it. So it's I think it's pretty cool. It works out. So.
Okay. Well, I mean, we could also put it into the aspect of like we got fire, we got thunder, poison maybe for bees, and just physical damage for the cat. I don't know. And then we could also go into different aspects. So we'll get an ice-related animal. Maybe we'll get a more wind-based related animal. Although we kind of got a little. I don't know. Anyways, they have so much they could do. They could literally do anything, and we wouldn't be like, oh, how this doesn't make any sense. Why didn't you do this? It'd be like, okay, sure, it fits easily in this super customizable raid.
If it's got a soul, we could use it.
Yeah.
That's kind of where we're at with this sort of thing at this point.
I think in the concept of doing raid design stuff, that's probably the best idea. Because you want to make sure the people who are programming fights and stuff can be, have fun with their creativity, with the mechanics, and they don't have to have something that's super accurate. They can just kind of have fun. But Moose, you said you had you wanted us to finish up Arcadion, so you could say some more Moose thoughts.
Oh, it's actually I was reminded of one of the only two things I thought were open. Like I thought that I thought Dawntrail explained pretty much everything except for two things. And I wanted to know what your guys' thoughts on this one were. In terms of when we saw the concept art and the previews, and we saw like, okay, we see the proto language, we see the lightning, we think that's probably another shard involved. It's like it's obviously got to be connected to the 12th, right? And then I mean, you know me, I'm a person who's very like it's not canon until it has a citation. It's not confirmed until it's confirmed.
Right.
So Grahatia back in the day made that PowerPoint of kind of what shard was rejoined in what calamity. He knows how they're laid out. He knows which ones are gone and which ones aren't. Yashola said that we can't know what shard that is unless we ask an Asian, and there's no one there to ask. And no one corrects her. Graha doesn't correct her. We never come back to it. Emmett Selk said the civilizations and the shards would surprise us, as if he was kind of referring to this. But I mean, if you're not in a reflection, if you've been rejoined, he didn't mention anything about like new splits or anything like that. Sphene gives us a timeline of 1,000 years. The Malala came to Sphene's shard in the 5th umbral, which I mean, there's still a lot of years of wobble there. But that fits into Sphene's 1,000-year timeline. We only got 30 years of variance when the dome appeared. And then Yoshida, in an interview, actually made some interesting comments where it seemed like he was blessing the existence of the infinite multiverse, wherever like an important event, whenever an important event happens, timeline splits. And I mean, I just broke my soul.
I'm not tracking all of that. I am not tracking
feelings. I'm not bringing my personal feelings to this, but he seemed to be blessing the possibility that there could be like some kind of alternate timeline, time manipulation thing going on. So at the same time, I feel like we haven't taken the 12th entirely off the table, but they've also passed up every opportunity to confirm either way. And it's like, I don't know what to think, especially if it is a new shard, because we thought we just saved all the ones that weren't rejoined. And man, that's depressing. We're already down another one. So I was wondering, like, what do you guys think about, like, am I crazy to think that it's still open?
It's
debate?
You're not. Or? It's because we're very much working off of in-game information right now, right? And to a certain extent, we can also trust the encyclopedias, but there's a caveat to that in that they are also written in universe. So they get more accurate as time goes on, because if you open the first one, there's an explanation of ether physics in there that is now just incorrect because we have finished, like, ARR. Like, even back then, if you go back to Arianche's original explanation, it's just wrong because we didn't have all of the information. Right? So I'm referencing this being the 12th shard because that's the one that is associated with a lightning calamity. it could be something else entirely. It's just the most likely culprit right now. But there is also the point of, we know we go to a different shard when we go to living memory. We have no indication that it's the same shard that the calamity that Alexandria experienced happened on, purely because we experienced a localized rejoining of Alexandria to the source. It's what the bubble is, right, for the Everkeep and Solution 9 and Heritage Found.
We've
the
seen
fusion,
dimensional compression come up before too.
It's localized rejoining is what I'm calling it, right? But we still go to another shard when we go to living memory. There's nothing saying that living memory is on the same shard or even the same planet.
Oh, I see what you
derived from Aetheris. It could be like somewhere else entirely, right? So there is a lot we don't know in terms of that, because there was a localized, it's exactly what Moose said.
I even had a theory mid-story. I feel like this theory's probably been disproven, but I left the door open for most of the story that we were actually not the first place they went, that the 12th actually went to another shard and had just completely drained it dry and then come to us. I don't know. I feel like
we're progressive.
It feels like they bounced a few times.
I have no idea. I feel like everybody has a theory they're very confident in, and I don't. And I feel like maybe I should. I don't know.
I don't have a confident theory. I just kind of have a suggestive idea. I don't know. It's weird. It's like, because just going off of what they've told us before about dimensional theory, like we only have what's in the game. And in the game in the past, they've done if you've done your role quests in Shadowbringers, right? You're introduced to the lore of the Shadow Lord, or the Shadowkeeper. Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's so many of these. Shadowlord's different. Shadowlord's ongoing. Shadowkeeper was.
We'll come back to Shadowlord.
Yes.
Right. The Shadowkeeper and all that. The whole how she explained it was like her actions helped turn the reflections elemental balance towards a certain way, and like how she caused those warriors of light to come into existence on purpose because it was creating a certain ethereal balance, and as a result, like she was purposely manipulating events throughout time and history so they would do that. And she mentioned, oddly enough, and then it's kind of come up a couple times, where it was like the first is a direct mirror to the 13th in terms of like, because of the 13th becoming completely dark aligned, somehow the first was more prone to becoming light aligned as a result. It was like some weird of like interpositional. I don't know. She mentions that like once and then moves on, and I'm like, stop this, like please, like if you're gonna mention something like this, you gotta like elaborate. But she did that. I want to say they bring it up again. And then they kind of show that off in Growing Light, because when you use that was a really weird cutscene. I thought it was interesting how they show the progression of light like moving around the source, almost like there's some sort of like dimensional wall between everything. And I don't know if that still affects stuff. With that in mind, I've always assumed like this lightning calamity speak of may not be the lightning calamity of the 12th, but maybe a mirror effect of that kind of stuff they were talking about. How the shards are bouncing off of each other somehow. And there's energy, like they have those connections that they're just now discovering, because Crystal Tower plot device allows them to do that. I'm absolutely certain we're going back at this point. We're gonna be like, we're definitely gonna need to use Crystal Tower for this stuff. Because how else are we gonna track where these shards are at now? Because now we know there's shards floating around.
It's I think this is fun more because it's asking us to ask these questions, which means we are going to be exploring more of it. So like we can speculate all we want, but we will be getting some sort of
Maybe not. Maybe they'll just say, whatever, let's go on to the next thing and just leave these open for a couple expansions and then bring it back near the end of the arc. I don't know. We'll see. These might not be anything that's even remotely immediate.
I know. No, I still remember my complete failed prediction on Bazia, because I went like when Bazia was being announced and they were showing the cutscenes. It's like, oh, that's the fourth Umbral Calamity. Look at that. Look at those raised platforms. I mean, that's definitely an earthquake effect, And I was blabbing.
All like, confirmed.
I was just yapping. Like I had absolutely no proof aside from the screenshots looking like a giant earthquake, and I was like, oh well, that's what had happened in that area. No, it was what? Like it was Sid's head. Like we went inside. That was his memories trying to like reform, and I was like, so wrong, completely wrong. But it was great. I still enjoyed it. I did admit later, like, hey guys, just delete that document, please. I hope no one saved it. Please don't share that. If it's still out there, get rid of it. Because I wrote this entire wrong theory, but it was just based. It was just you're just diving into it. You're like, oh my gosh, maybe this, you know.
I mean, what else are you gonna do? Not dive into it?
Right.
I mean, what's the other choice?
Speculating. It's fun to be right, and it's even more fun to be wrong because it means the story surprised you in a good way.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Right. And it, like for me, the only thing that matters is how you label it. Like that when it's wild speculation, you call it wild speculation. When it's trying to put pieces together and it makes sense to you, it's trying to put the pieces together and it makes sense to you. Like it's as long as one doesn't become another, then the fun is maintained. Like as long as you're not saying it makes sense to me, so it's true. Like
so
everything else is fun.
Here's the thing that goes wrong in a lot of communities and causes a lot of friction is when you're uncertain and you're coming up with these theories, it doesn't define who you are. Right? This your theory you created is not you. It's just something you made that was fun, right? And so when someone disagrees with you, it's not an attack against you. It's an attack.
Not sharing your opinion is not a rejection of you as a person.
Exactly.
Exactly.
It's not an insult on your intelligence or your thoughts or your.
Everyone has different brains,
opinions, right?
I wish that was more relevant and more, I don't know, consistent in other communities too, of when discussing things such as the tank differences in video games.
I run into that in every pop culture bubble.
Oh, jeez, it's rough. Well, that being said, we've already been here for over 2 hours, guys. We do have to start wrapping it up. Yeah. But, I mean, this has been fun talking about this stuff. There's going to be a lot more coming down the pipeline. Moose, you're going to settle on some of this stuff. And then the expansion came out a month and a half ago, right? So we're about, 2-3 months away from 0.1?
Yeah, when they start announcing and everything. It's usually the cycle.
So we're about...
That was my question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are you going to want to talk lore again before to get ready for 0.1 or after 0.1 where we just digest how the new stuff connects to the old stuff? Because it's not like we're going to have to discuss a whole expansion.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it just depends. I mean, honestly, it really... There's so much to really absorb. Like, we just scratched the surface of the expansion, right? With this whole discussion. There's a lot that we could dive into. We could probably do a whole zone episode, right? Just this episode could be focused completely on the first zone or the second zone or the third zone and talk for 2 hours on it and probably have some interesting conversations. And so if that's something that is the community's interested in and you guys are interested in, I'm okay, coming and doing those kind of shows here. The easiest one would be right after 0.1, and then just kind of relating what we learned in that patch and bringing it back to everything. But there's still a lot to explore, lore and story.
Hollow Island.
Yeah.
It's like, wait, how's this MSQ relevant now? And then I'm like, wow, that was really relevant. Holy crap.
There's so much that we could pinpoint, but that's really just gauging on your guys' interest and everything. But if you guys want to do it, I'm not going to say no to an easy show.
I'm a vampire. I just need to be invited.
Okay.
I'm always around.
Well, you're always
easily summoned for lore.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that being said, we'll go ahead and start the closing stuff. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you guys for coming back. It's been a couple weeks since we've done a MogTalk. The World Race has kept me super busy. And just trying to stay above water. I'm starting to breathe some air now, so it feels good. But that being said, let's have you all do your outros and where people can find you. Any last things you want to say? Thanks, whatever, to whoever. And I'll go in the same order. Moose, if you don't mind.
Sure. I was actually just making a list of all the places I am, and they all have different names. I really need to do something about this at some point. I'll just put it this way. If you go to Twitch and look up the name Onwyll, Anwyll, you'll find links to everything that matters. So I'm just going to say that from now on.
Okay.
And then I will start consolidating names from there. But twitch.tv/Onwyll, Anwyll.
Okay. Any last words you want to leave with everybody?
thanks for caring about lore. I mean, that's really it. I mean, most of I would be doing this anyway. Like, I would just be alone in my room dicking around with spreadsheets, and no one would ever know. No one would ever care, but I would be doing it anyway. So the fact that we have a lore community who's interested in hearing about whatever shakes out of those investigations is incredible to me. It's all I've ever wanted, is to have like a community of people around a little campfire where we talk about stories. So like, shout out to anyone who cares enough to sit down and watch this show and listen to us, and shout out especially to the three of you for being here and having some like people to talk to. Having people to talk to is really nice. So thanks so much to Em and Crow for being here and caring about lore and being so fun to talk to. And thanks for Frosty for making the space to do it.
I mean, that's why I'm fucking here, dude. I like to find the people who are sitting in a room messing with spreadsheets and they're just aching to get it out, all right? Because those are always the best. So as long as somebody wants to talk and they are passionate about it, it's always a fun time for me, dude. All right, Em?
We got to do like a lore dinner at Sandfest or something. I do love spreadsheets. That's correct. That's why you had me do world-based stuff. You were like, "Here's a spreadsheet," and I said, "Ooh."
Yeah.
I am easy to find. I am Emanarum on all platforms. Recent stuff to plug. I am now a full-time cast member on the Lore Lines podcast. We do a show every Saturday morning. It's been a lot of fun. We have Crow on as a guest next week, I believe, and I know we're going to try to get Moose on again at some point.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, I'm not the person in charge of organizing it. I just show up and talk about things, which is always a blast. And cosplay stuff. I'm doing a lot of Final Fantasy things, specifically 14, but also others, at Dragon Con here at the end of the month. So if anyone's going to Dragon Con, hey, I've got 14 ribbons. You want to come hang out, do Final Fantasy things with me in person? Come say hi. I will be around.
Yeah, on another note, too, I mean, shout out to Gateway Fate that's coming down the line that M will be at, I believe, too, and I'll be at. Nice. I may even have a couple of panels I need to do there, too. So, we'll see. It's coming down the line, though. You guys should definitely check it out. There's actually, I think, a banner on the channel, too, if you guys want to check it out there. The unofficial Final Fantasy 14 convention in St. Louis in October, which is going to be really interesting, because I don't think...
I'm looking forward to hear from it. Yeah, it looks really cool.
It'll be a good time.
Yeah, I think so. But that being said, Crow, you as well.
Yeah, well, as always, it's an absolute pleasure to be here amongst friends and lore aficionados alike. Always, I mean, like Moose says, right? We do this stuff because we want to. We enjoy it. It's a hobby. It's a passion. It's a special interest. You know, if we didn't have this, we'd be talking to random people on the street, and they don't want that, right? That doesn't work out very well as bad. So this is a great place to talk lore. But yeah, it's just always a pleasure to be able to do this, and I appreciate it. And all the rants and stuff, we get to talk about all the deep stuff. We get to talk about some of the stuff we don't think about, and then I like watching, also the conversations in chat, right? I would have never made that FF9 connection without looking at chat, that kind of stuff. So it's just like really neat, connection. Everyone's just like vibing with the story. And again, pushing this narrative past. It's been 10 years, right? Final Fantasy 14 is being recognized for 10 years of existence. And we got Yoshida wants to go on for 10 more years. We'll see how that happens.
He said good, so I don't know.
Yeah, but I like what we're starting off with, right? This is a very good start. I want to see how this develops. And then finally, of course, I do have to mention Yo hablo español, right? I got super excited about all of that, right? That was just IRL all over the place. I was like, I've ate this food before. I've talked this culture before. I was like, I've been here. I'm basically in here again, but in the video game. So huge shout out to Square Enix for that representation. I guarantee you, there are dozens, if not thousands, of individuals out there who are super, super grateful for an opportunity to be represented and have a voice in Final Fantasy 14 now. And that's not just going to be them, right? I mean, who knows what other opportunities are going to be arriving with the new shards to be introduced, with the new, we still haven't been in Marassa, and we already know they're referencing Africa and Australia there with the minions that come from that place. So it's like, who knows what stories there are left, right? All kinds of stuff. So you want to keep listening to that, right? You can hear me. I talk about on my side of things at the SLM, right? ESSLIM. You can find me on pretty much everything. I've been trying to spread out there. It's rough. I just recently started multi-stream for the first time ever. I was like, oh, I can do this. Oh my gosh. I'll press a button and all of a sudden multiple people can see it. Oh, like, yeah, I'm still trying to get out there. But if you do have any questions ever, right, I'm always open. Always want to help out with understanding the story a little bit more. So, yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, and again, thank you to all three of you for coming on for this show. It's one of my favorite shows to do. I usually don't have to do anything. It works
we just love being here and talking about these things. It's the best part of lore communities, coming together to compare notes, and oftentimes we'll disagree, and a lot of times we'll be like, oh, you made that connection too, okay, let's keep finding parallels. It's a lot of fun.
Right. But guys, I plan to be back here next week as well. YouTube uploads should be starting to flow again after dealing with a couple issues, so look forward to those. We have a couple episodes that are, if you will come out around the same time as this one, but they were done like a month ago. Sorry.
Editing is hard.
It's just there's so many things and with it.
Process.
But yeah, I'll be back again. This is the Frosty Mog channel for Twitch. I don't think the YouTube's going to change. It's still the MogTalk channel there at the moment. But you guys can find me at those places if you want to. Next week's episode, there's a lot of stuff to talk about. I just got to figure out which topic it's going to be. I don't have an exact answer on it yet. But yeah, keep enjoying the game. Remember to be good to everybody else. Stay cool, or keep cool and stay frosty, guys. Bye. See you.
Bye.
Everybody say bye.